Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's MLDP Municipal Leaders Roles and Responsibilities webinar. My name is Adam Brome, and I'm a Communications and Events Coordinator with SARM. We'll start up today's webinar by going over some of the key functions of the team's platform. Next, we will hear a few words from the SARM President and the RMAA Vice President. We'll then transition into the main presentations. We have three. Each presentation will be followed by a brief Q&A session. In addition, this webinar will be recorded and a copy of the recording will be available to view on our webinar's webpage. And please let us know through the chat if you're experiencing any technical difficulties during today's session. The chat can be accessed by clicking on the comment bubble icon on your screen. The chat is also where you can submit any questions that you may have for the Q&A sessions. If we run out of time before your question has been asked, our presenters will follow up with you directly offline after the webinar. Please note that your questions will be visible to all participants and presenters, so if there's anything that you would like to ask offline, please forward those questions to the appropriate presenters or SARM staff members following today's seminar. And copies of today's presentations and the webinar recording will be distributed to all attendees following the webinar. So now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Dustin Reich, SARM's Manager of Programs, who will be moderating today's webinar.
Hi, everybody. Really delighted to see so many people on this webinar. As Adam mentioned, this is the Municipal Leaders Roles and Responsibilities webinar. And, you know, we've kind of been doing this for several years, and it is geared initially for the newly elected. However, we change up different aspects of the webinar every year. And so that way, folks who've maybe done it before get the refresher on the Ministry of Government Relations' presentation on municipal leaders' roles and responsibilities. But then we also include sessions on emerging governance issues and also some governance best practices. And so we've got two additional guests with us today who will hopefully share things with you that maybe be new for you or maybe things you haven't heard in a while. And so it's my intention and hope that you'll have a very rich learning experience today. Before we get rolling with our guests, we have two presentations, one from the SARM President, Ray Orb, and another from the RMAA Vice President, Sheila Kiesig. And so we'll begin with Ray's presentation first, and I'll hand that back over to Adam to run that presentation.
Everyone to the Municipal Leaders Roles and Responsibilities Workshop, a module of the Municipal Leadership Development Program. I'm Ray Orb, President of SARM. On behalf of SARM, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for choosing a role in local government. You have all made an important decision to serve your municipality and take an active role in guiding its future. Local government plays an important role in all of our daily lives, not only the lives of the ones holding a seat at the table, but the general public as well. An educated local government is a strong local government. So thank you for being here today to learn more about the roles and responsibilities of being a municipal leader. The MLDP provides current and essential information on a wide range of topics, all relevant and developed specifically for local government. Reeves, mayors, councillors, and municipal staff are able to benefit from this program that's designed to strengthen local government leadership. And this fall marked the 20th anniversary of the MLDP. The first modules rolled out in October of 2003. And since that time, there have been several hundred MLDP workshops with several thousand municipal leaders attending one or more modules. Today's workshop is just one of 6 currently offered. On the MLDP website, you'll be able to review all the modules available through the program. MLDP modules are offered in various formats, including in-person, online, and virtual. I encourage you to take the modules. They'll benefit you as a member of local government. Christina Berry, the program administrator, is on the webinar this afternoon. Please contact her by email or telephone if you have any questions or would like to discuss the program with her. Her email address and telephone number will be listed in the chat. In recognition of your attendance of this workshop, each of you will receive a certificate of completion and credit in the program. These certificates will be emailed directly to you. Today's session will conclude at 4:30. I hope that you'll find it worthwhile and the information useful. I want to thank our presenters and everyone for joining us here today. We hope you'll attend another MLDP session soon. Our next speaker is Sheila Kiesek, the Vice President of the Rural Municipal Administrators Association. She is also the Administrator of the arm of Telemet, number 216.
Welcome to all elected officials. Today provides an excellent opportunity to learn about SARM's programs and your new rewarding position. Today also provides a refresher for many of you who have been on council for a longer time. I commend all of you for your commitment to your communities and to rural Saskatchewan. I also want to thank SARM for giving the RMAA an opportunity to talk about our association and the role we play in the day-to-day functions of your RM. I'm Sheila Kiesig, Vice President of the RMAA, Rural Municipal Administrators Association. I was elected to this role in 2020. I am the administrator at the RM of Telemet, number 216, which I've been at since 2005. The RMAA has an excellent working relationship with SARM. We have worked together on many projects with both associations seeking the other's knowledge and expertise. One such initiative that we began as a 2-year pilot project in 2020. It was proven to be successful in that short time, so we expanded it to be an ongoing program. The Advanced Mentorship Program, or AMP, is focused on newly hired certified administrators. Our coordinator, Jill Palachuk, and advisors, Don McCollum and Joan Babsey, reach out to these newly hired administrators to see how they're progressing in their new roles. Don and Joan will then visit the office of each administrator that wishes to participate in the program. The feedback has been exceptional. The AMP program will greatly benefit the administrator, the council, and the entire RM and ratepayers. Each year, we meet with SARM to discuss salary negotiations. SARM has endorsed this schedule continually for many years, but it also must be mentioned that this salary is based on your average RM. The salary schedule is negotiated in an open and honest atmosphere between the RMAA and SARM. It is our hope that the salary negotiations between your council and your administrator will also be conducted in the same open and fair manner. This year, upon numerous requests from our members, the RMAA hired a third-party consultant to survey the RMs in the province in regards to their salaries, benefits, and overall remuneration within their capacity as an RM administrator. We have shared that information with all offices, and as a board are quite pleased with the uptake of the survey, with almost 75% administrators responding. We are happy to state that the findings in this report show the value in the salary schedule. Another unique part of our relationship with SARM is that SARM's president has a place on our board as the ex officio director, and in turn, our president sits on the SARM board as the ex officio director. The differing views and knowledge that is brought to the two tables is invaluable. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge the RMAA executive. Division 1, Cheryl Barrett, RM of Martin, number 122. Division 2, Carol Belfay, RM of Baildon, number 131. Division 3, Raylene Packett, RM of Enterprise, 142. Division 4 is currently vacant. By-election is happening in mid-December, sometime in there, so those results will be posted on our website. Division 5, Dorn Scott, RM of Blucher, number 343. Division 6, Michelle Beekler, RM of Payton, number 470. President Guy Legranger, RM of Redburn, number 130. Past President Wendy Gauda. Director ex officio and President of SARM, Ray Orb, Reeve of the RM of QPAR, number 218. and our Executive Director, Rose Zimmer, Arm of Wolseley, number 155. I want to touch briefly on certification for rural administrators. It is legislated that each RM have a certified administrator hired. Administrators must be a member in good standing of the RMAA in order to work by obtaining the proper certification. To receive a certificate, the person must meet the specified educational classes and in-office hands-on training. Each member must be current in their annual professional development hours to be considered in good standing. The RMAA strives to deliver the most up-to-date workshops and seminars for our members. It is imperative that Council encourage their administrators to attend workshops and conventions to stay current on any legislative changes, grant opportunities, and so much more. Likewise, it is key that you as elected officials take part in learning and networking opportunities that enhance your capabilities and benefit the municipalities that you have been elected to serve. The resources that SARM, RMAA, and government relations have for newly elected council members is readily available and are excellent tools for you to use in your new capacity. I encourage all council members to ask questions to your administrators. We love nothing more than to talk about our jobs. I truly feel it makes for a better council member as well as a better working relationship when communication is open and honest. In closing, I want to say that the RMAA is prepared to assist councils and administrators wherever we can within the context of our mandate to do so. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact any member of our executive. All our contact info is on the RMAA website at rmaa.ca. Have a great rest of your MLDP module. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. I'm certain that both Ray and Sheila would be happy for you to reach out to either of them or to any member of the SARM board or the RMAA executive. They've always been very responsive and love to hear from their members. So I encourage you to do that if you ever see the need. I believe that we can now get into our first main session. And so every year at the MLRR, we have Municipal Leaders' Roles and Responsibilities, a session offered by the Ministry of Government Relations. And it's such a central session that we actually named the whole module after it. In previous years, we've had Judy Kanak, Manager Advisory Services, present for us. But this year, we have a brand new face, or a new person in that position anyway. Megan Istace started her municipal career in 2010 as the first intern under SARM's Municipal Administrator Internship Program. That MATE program is something that we continue to offer, and it's something that I would encourage you to take a look into if you're ever looking for succession planning for your administrator, or if you'd like to consider training an intern. They may end up in Megan's role at some day. After several years as the administrator of a rural municipality in Southeast Regina, she joined the Ministry of Government Relations in 2019, and in September 2023 transitioned into the role of the Advisory Services Manager. When Megan's not working, she enjoys spending time with her family, and most importantly, her rescue dog, Boggs. So I don't know if Boggs will make an appearance on our webinar today. Maybe that would be a great idea for the next time, or if we ever do this in person again, we have to have Boggs around. But I'm excited for Megan to join us here, and in our conversations leading up to this session, I've always been thrilled with Megan's interest in engagement and her passion for teaching rural municipalities and their councils about governance. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Megan.
Thank you very much. That was a very kind introduction. My dog is my screensaver. My family's pictures in behind me, which is you can't see. But I think if my dog was with me, it might not be as conducive to get your attention. So anyhow, thank you again for the introduction. I'm here today to speak to you about your municipal roles and responsibilities. Bear with me, I'm working with 3 screens, so I feel like I'm running the Starship Enterprise right now. So if I'm a little bit behind on advancing my slides, somebody get my attention. So to start things off, here's a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. And this is just going to touch on what you'll need to know about being a municipal council member. So it's impossible to cover everything in this short amount of time that we have here today. However, please know that there are many resources available to you, and our office is always available to answer your questions. So to go over our overview, when I say background, we're going to have a little brief history lesson in legislation. So please stay awake. We're going to talk a little bit about permissive legislation and natural person powers. I'm also going to then get into municipal authority and talk about municipal purposes and your authority to govern as a municipality. One of the key components of our legislation and as your role as an elected official all ties back to accountability. So we're going to talk about things like public disclosure statement, conflict of interest, code of ethics, and the different roles that council, the administrator, and the public play in that capacity. We'll touch on a few procedural matters, things like your council procedures bylaw, decision-making, and closed sessions, and then close out with any additional training and resources. We'll touch on what's available to you. So without further ado, let's get into a little bit of background here. So actually, I'm already a little bit too quick. As I said, I wanted to give a little bit of a history lesson on how we are where we are today. And in order to do that, we look back to what our former legislation was, which was the Rural Municipality Act and the Urban Municipality Act. These were in force up until 2006. And then in 2006, the legislation combined into what we operate under now, which is the Municipalities Act. It's been almost 20 years. Some still refer to it as new legislation, but I assure you it is not new. When these two pieces of legislation came together into the Municipalities Act, what it did was really established how municipal governments interact with the provincial government. Municipalities were empowered by this legislation and were given permissive powers. Our old legislation was very prescriptive, and if it didn't say that a municipality could do something, it couldn't do it. With the Municipalities Act, we call it permissive legislation. So the default is that you have the authority to act in the way that you care. I maybe not saying that the right way, but you have the authority to make a decision as long as legislation doesn't say otherwise, that you don't have that power. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that permissive and prescriptive and natural person powers in the upcoming slides. The Municipalities Act also reinforces that municipalities are a level of government and they are held responsible by their voters rather than assumed oversight by the provincial government. There are certain components that the province monitors. However, your accountability is to your voters. Specific legislation was brought in with the Municipalities Act to enable public participation. So things like your public notice bylaw that you have. Prescriptive legislation does still exist where it's required. That ties back to assessment and taxation. But in the grand scheme of things, you have a lot of authority as a municipal government. But with that authority, it's balanced with the accountability to your public. So as I mentioned earlier, a key component of permissive legislation is the concept of natural person powers. And this was actually introduced in 1995 in Alberta, I believe, and soon after in Ontario and BC followed suit. Natural person powers does not give a municipality superpowers, doesn't give you any more jurisdiction than what you already had, but it gives you the flexibility to make decisions as if you were a natural person. So yes, municipalities have the same rights, powers, and privileges of a natural person. You have the same legal powers as other corporations or persons to conduct your day-to-day business without the need for specific legislative authority. So, and that's subject to any limitations in legislation. So as an example, you as a municipal council may decide that you want to install security cameras on your municipal property. That's a natural person power. You have that authority to do that. But being a municipal level of government, you are subject to the Local Authority Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. So you'll have to comply with any requirements from that legislation when you're considering installing security cameras on your municipal property. That's just one example. And as I was saying earlier, the concept of natural person powers changed that default authority from prescriptive to being permissive. When a municipality has natural person powers, they can acquire and sell property. You can enter into contracts. You have the ability to provide for grants that you see fit and are appropriate within your municipality or maybe surrounding area. As a natural person power, you also have the ability to determine your staffing requirements. And at minimum, you need to have an appointed administrator. But aside from that, you decide whether you need maybe a development officer in your municipality, or do you have a foreman on staff, or is it contracted work? Do you require to have an on-staff building inspector? Another feature or part of natural person powers is that a municipality can also take or be subject to legal action. Natural person powers, they don't override your certain legislative duties. So for instance, you still are required to prepare a budget. You are required to appoint an auditor, and you're required to hire a qualified administrator. But it's given you the flexibility of how to do those things is what natural person powers do. Okay, so moving along, the Municipalities Act also set out what are the purposes of municipalities. And I believe this is either section 3 or 4 of the Municipalities Act for those administrators on the call that want to pull this up and take a look. But the purposes of municipalities are to provide good government, making decisions that affect everyone in the municipality. People want services and facilities. Part of your job is determining what is needed versus what is wanted, and then figuring out how to resource those services or facilities. People also want communities that are safe, obviously. And of course, if you will want a municipality that is viable beyond just your term of office. And lastly, a municipality has a responsibility to safeguard and maintain its infrastructure and public access, or public assets. These are all very broad statements that you see on your screen, but they're powerful. It's almost like your mission statement as a municipality. Now, in the Municipalities Act, it sets out the municipality's framework to govern within your jurisdiction. Throughout the legislation, you'll see a lot of shalls or mays, and shalls obligate your council to act. They're non-negotiables. So as an example, you shall conduct your meetings in public. May is also used extensively, and that's where it's empowering you to act. You may choose to do something, or you may choose not to. But you have to be prepared to answer the questions why, because the act also states that council is accountable to the public. So whatever your council decides, just be prepared to justify your decisions should they be asking why that decision was made. Municipalities are also required to act through council. This is a statement, or pardon me, a couple of clauses early into the Municipalities Act. Says that they're required to act through council by passing of resolutions or bylaws. Now, to pass a resolution or bylaw, that's done at a duly called meeting. And to hold a council meeting, appropriate public notice must be given, quorum of council members must be present, and the administrator or their designate must attend. Individual council members cannot make decisions alone. They are part of a team, which is the entire council. It's not acceptable to make a decision by email or text message. Email and text messages actually take away the public's right to participate in their municipal government, which is also not demonstrating openness and transparency. Decisions can only be made by resolution. And if a decision has to be made on short notice, it's best to call a special meeting, or if possible, wait till your next regular meeting. In many cases, texts or emails, messages, they relate to operational matters, and council can set a policy authorizing or directing the administrator to handle those various matters. So let's get into accountability. The foundations of accountability really start with the oath of office. I said that very poorly. Oath of office or affirmation of office. This is a required document that you have to sign when you take office. Being that we're not in an election year, and some of you may have been elected in a by-election recently, or you're nearing the last year of your term, you would have signed this before you commenced your duties with this term. What this is it's prescribed, and it really sets out what you're committed to as you're fulfilling your term on council. Any member that actually refuses to sign an oath has no right to participate in council debate or decisions. The act very clearly states that every member of council shall, before carrying out any power, duty, or function of his or her office, take an official oath or affirmation in the prescribed form. Okay. I apologize, I lost my spot in my screen, but oath of offices, they are also public documents. So they can be expected by the public, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Another key component of accountability are the public disclosure statements that you would be familiar with from being elected to council. So the public disclosure statement has a direct impact when dealing with a conflict of interest. It is also a public document and can be inspected by anyone. It's not a prescribed form in legislation, but it is mandatory to complete. And your municipality will have adopted its own form for council members to use. It does contain certain information about a council member and his or her family's employment, financial interests, business interests, and property holdings. Public disclosure statements, they identify, like what I just said, those employment, financial, business, and property holdings. And one statement in the oath of office is that you'll declare any conflict of interest. This is where the public disclosure statement comes into play. A public disclosure statement is tied directly to your term of office. So you would have completed it when you submitted your nomination papers. And then once you were elected, because you are elected, you would have completed your a new public disclosure statement within 30 days. And actually today marks the day that an annual declaration needs to be made that the public disclosure statement is accurate to what your current holdings are. Should you have a change mid-year or mid-term, you also need to update that information and fill out an amendment form. So the public disclosure statement is all encompassing. It follows your term of office. You fill it out when you're nominated, you fill it out when you're first elected. You annually declare that your public disclosure statement is accurate. And when you do have a change, you complete an amendment form. These are things to talk to your administrator about to make sure that you're keeping it updated. And like I said, today is the deadline to have your annual declaration completed. Some things that might change your situation to think about where you need to update your public disclosure statement is maybe you are renting a new quarter of land, or you've sold a quarter of land, or maybe your spouse has changed employers. Those are things that would require amendments. So conflict of interest. all ties back to that accountability as well, and the public disclosure statement and oath of office. So conflict of interest is an essential part of legislation all members of council need to be mindful of. It's important to know that when a financial interest is involved, conflict of interest exists, regardless of the amount of money that is involved. And another key thing to point out with conflict of interest, it's okay. In fact, there's a high possibility that many council members will eventually be in conflict of interest on one matter or another that comes before council. And it is more likely to occur in smaller communities where the pool of potential contractors and employees is smaller. But what's really important is how the council member handles a conflict of interest. So how do you handle a conflict of interest? It's really quite easy to properly handle it. When a matter comes before council that you have a conflict of interest in, or even if you think that you might have a conflict of interest in, you would follow through with these steps. So first, you would declare that you have a conflict of interest before any consideration on that matter. You're also going to disclose what that conflict is and why and how it might affect your impartiality. You need to make sure to abstain from voting on a question, decision, recommendation, or other action that council is considering about that matter. And refrain from participating in any discussion on it, outside of meetings and at meetings. And most importantly, leaving the room until the discussion and voting on the matter has concluded. Once council has finished dealing with that matter, you can return to council chambers and carry on with business. So council members, as I said, it's okay to be in a conflict of interest. It's how you handle it is the most important. Council members are individually responsible for determining whether or not they have a conflict of interest. It's an ethical duty essential to good governance. And it's not the responsibility of other council members to monitor or police your handling of a conflict, nor is it the responsibility of the municipal administrator or other staff. Every council, when you sign that oath of office, every council member, I should say, when you sign that oath of office, swears or affirms that conflict of interest will be disclosed. Should conflict of interest not be disclosed, it is a reason for council or disqualification from being on council, and you would be required to resign immediately. There are other actions that can be taken. For instance, declaring the seat vacant, and then the council member would have the ability to appeal that decision. We are actually often asked at advisory services about how to force a council member to declare a conflict of interest. And the short answer is you can't. But there are steps that could be taken to encourage appropriate behavior. So informally, you can identify your concern by verbally asking that other council member if it might be a conflict for them. You can request a recorded vote so that the minutes will show who voted for and against a resolution. The minutes are public and could be evidence for determining who is present during that decision making. You can formally raise the concern by making a resolution or filing a complaint under the RM's Code of Ethics bylaw. And then lastly, there's always the option of using the courts. And speaking of Code of Ethics bylaw, every municipality in the province must have a Code of Ethics bylaw in place. This is mandatory from the Municipalities Act. And this bylaw would define how you as a council member should treat staff, other council members, and the public. So it talks about honesty. Council members must be truthful and open. Objectivity. Decisions must be made carefully, fairly, and impartially. Respect for everyone, including other council members and staff, who must be treated with dignity, understanding, and respect. Transparency and accountability. Council business should be conducted in open sessions so citizens will clearly see how and why decisions are made. and confidentiality. Confidential information that you learn during the course of performing your office must be kept private. As a member of council, you should not benefit from the information you learned in fulfilling your role as an elected official. Leadership and public interest. You will serve your citizens and act in the best interests of the municipality. You understand that personal benefit, wrongdoing, or unethical conduct must not be tolerated. Responsibility. Act in accordance with legislation. Disclose all conflicts of interest and follow the policies and procedures of your municipality. Within your Code of Ethics bylaw, you must also include a process for dealing with any breaches to your Code of Ethics. It should also include possible remedial actions required of a council member who violates the Code of Ethics. Some possibilities for remedial action could be as simple as apology or as an apology, or having to take training, certain type of training for whatever might be related to that infraction. Code of Ethics, as I said, it is a requirement of all municipalities. If you're not familiar with the bylaw itself, ask your administrator to have a copy. Complaints could be filed by a fellow council member against another. It could be filed by a public person or a contractor. It is something to uphold ethical behavior of council members and something to be aware of. And as I was mentioning earlier, that these four work together, the oath of office, your public disclosure statement, conflict of interest, and code of ethics. They're all the pillars of accountability. When you decide to run for municipal office, you accept the duty to act in the municipality's best interests and without your private or perceived interests affecting your decision-making. Public disclosure statements are that mechanism for the public to hold their elected council members accountable, ensuring that council members are making decisions in the best interests of the municipality versus their own. And you have a conflict of interest with everything that is listed in your public disclosure statement. And lastly, the Code of Ethics bylaw requires that you declare all conflicts of interest. This may include conflicts that are not on your public disclosure statement. And there will likely be that time, as I was saying before, sooner or later during your term of office, where a matter that comes before council is something that you have a conflict of interest on. It's okay, just handle it the proper way. So moving into our general procedures, I think I'm kind of flying through this. I apologize, but at least leaves, I guess, a little bit more time for questions. So when we talk about general procedures, I thought it was important to highlight decision making. And I did say this earlier when we were talking about the background, but decisions are made by resolution or bylaw. You can establish policies for your municipality, just to ensure that they are adopted properly by a resolution or a bylaw. We hear a lot about text message decisions or email decisions in between meetings. Decisions such as these would be contravening legislations because, again, they're supposed to be made in an open public meeting. In most cases, these decisions tend to be on the administrative or operational side of things for matters that come up in between those meetings. So when this is the case, establish a policy in either the form of a resolution or bylaw, like I was saying, that provides direction to your administrator to carry out. This not only would comply with legislation, but it also provides that consistency and fairness that your public should have and deserve. When it comes to council meetings, with certain exceptions, all council meetings are open to the public, which means anybody, even people that are not ratepayers of your municipality. People have the right to watch local government in action as long as they behave. So that being said, this also means that anything discussed in a regular session of council is public information, and that can be discussed outside that council meeting. The more open and transparent that council is, the fewer problems you are going to have with public trust. If the public wishes to address council, they can ask your administrator to be a delegate, and the procedures for which are outlined in your council procedures bylaw. Some municipalities, they have annual ratepayers meetings. These types of meetings are for exchanging information, not for deciding municipal matters. They are not required by legislation, but they are an excellent way to engage with your voters. And this is also a good time to discuss the interaction of council members during council meetings. People who disagree are not necessarily in conflict. Debate is healthy and it often leads to great decisions. Council members should communicate clearly and openly, provide input, and respect the input of others. Focus on the facts and confront conflict early instead of allowing it to fester and snowball into the next meeting and the next and the next. So as I was saying, council meetings are open to the public. However, there are times in which you would go into closed session, also called in camera. Council has the ability to close all or a portion of their meetings to the public. But be careful how you use them and use them sparingly. They exist for a reason, because there are going to be things that come across the table that either are for long-range strategic planning or are matters that would be covered under privacy legislation that you would close that portion of the meeting. But closing meetings too often and maybe unnecessarily can lead to a lot of assumptions from ratepayers, including suspicions. This does not help with improving the building of trust. And while in some circumstances, confidentiality is important to good governance, secrecy is going to weaken it. I did mention LaFoIP as part of a reason to close your meeting to the public. So that's the Local Authority Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. So things like legal advice or employee matters, personnel matters. Those would be things to close your meeting. And really make sure to look at your council procedures bylaw. It's going to set out that process of how you're going to go into closed session and how it needs to be reflected in the minutes. Another highlight I wanted to have was on public notice. So your municipality may need to provide notice to the public before council discusses certain matters. Some of the instances where public notice must be given are special and rescheduled regular meetings. When you set your council remuneration, public notice is required. If your municipality has to borrow money or permanently close a road. These are just a few of the circumstances, but consult with your public notice bylaw for your municipality to know what your obligations are. Another area that I wanted to touch on is your organizational structure. So before we delve into the major roles as they relate to municipal government, I thought it would be a good idea to look at the organizational structure of a municipality. And if you've attended this presentation before, you'll recognize this, this visual. It's important to note that in this example, the public is at the top. Municipal council, and if you do have any boards or committees established, they are accountable to the public. The administrator reports directly to council, and the foreman and staff report to the administrator. This is just a sample of one model. However, there are others that exist and are ultimately determined by your municipality. Except for stating that council is accountable to the voters and that council must appoint an administrator, legislation does not describe how your municipality is set up. There's a lot of information available on municipal governance, and it often discusses the drawbacks of elected officials becoming occupied in municipal operations. The key thing to remember here really is communication. So when everybody understands what their role is, the municipality is more likely to function properly, smoothly, and successfully. Typically, when our office hears of a municipality having trouble with staff or the public, the cause is often because there's a weakness in its organizational structure. So the lesson here is respect everybody's role. So speaking of roles, council members, and this is set out right within the Municipalities Act. No matter if it's urban or rural, or mayor or reeve, every single council member is required to represent the public in their best interests, to participate in developing policies, programs, and services, participate in meetings, ensure administrative practices and procedures are in place, keep private matters confidential, and maintain the municipality's financial integrity. And this is collectively, this is not one individual council member's role, it's as a whole. The slide is missing another very important duty, though, that elected officials should not involve themselves in the day-to-day operations of the municipality. Council members cannot be employees of the municipality, nor can they act as an employee. Council members, simply put, are decision makers and policy makers, not the action takers. So leave the operations of the municipality to your staff. And this is another important reason of why to have an organizational chart if you don't already. Aside from these general duties of all council members, a reeve or mayor has only very limited additional powers according to legislation. So they are to chair council meetings unless you have a bylaw stating otherwise. They have the ability to call a special council meeting, and they are deemed the head as defined under the Local Authority Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. When we talk about the role of the administrator's role includes providing financial management. They advise council on legislative and operational matters and provide the overall administration of the municipality. As Sheila had mentioned in her opening remarks, administrators must be qualified according to the boards of examiners. And there's a rural board of examiners for RM administration and urban board of examiners for urban administrators. Legislation does require that every municipality appoints a person for the office of administrator, and that person must be qualified. And the qualification is deemed by the Board of Examiners. A municipality cannot operate without an administrator unless special permission is granted by the board. And if not otherwise provided for by council, the administrator is responsible for the hiring, suspension, and dismissal of all municipal employees. So council may set out the organizational structure to determine what positions are required for the municipality, but it would be the administrator responsible for the hiring, suspension, and dismissal, unless that's otherwise provided for by council. Administrators are also expected to remain impartial in their role as advisors, and they have to ensure that the decisions that are made by the council are carried out. In addition to the Municipalities Act, the administrator must be aware of any other legislative requirements that apply to the municipality. A significant number of other provincial statutes that are under the purview of other ministries require certain basic services or responsibilities, or provide more specific authority over certain matters. And lastly, but more importantly, when it comes to discussing roles and responsibilities, we need to discuss the role of the public. So we've said this kind of earlier in our previous slides, but council is accountable to the public. And the way that the public can hold council accountable and be engaged in what's going on in their municipality is by attending to observe those meetings and council committee meetings. They can access municipal documents. That would be minutes, things like bylaws, your annual audited financial statements, and auditor's report, any contracts that the municipality has entered into and accounts paid, and back to your public disclosure statements. The public also has the ability to petition council. So I had mentioned earlier about having an annual ratepayers meeting, but maybe your municipality doesn't do that and the public wants it. They can petition for that to happen. They can also petition for a referendum on certain matters. They can also petition to have special audits conducted into the management of the municipality or the finances. And as you probably already know, because you're well into your term of a elected official, is that you can also expect to have informal conversations with your public and your voters who you represent. And the biggest thing as an elected official is to take those conversations and bring the matters to the council table, bring it to a meeting for it to be discussed properly. Because remember, all decisions from council come from council as a whole and not an individual council member. One of the last slides that I want to cover, and again, you may recognize this from previous presentations, and it kind of ties back to that relationship, whether it be council member to another council member, council and staff, or with the public, is that no matter the relationship, it's really important to understand how trust is the foundation of any effective relationship. So everyone starts with a stranger level of trust. And as you get to know a person, that trust builds. But if that trust breaks by whatever action or decision, don't assume that it's going to automatically return to that stranger level of trust or this horizontal line that you see on the screen. It really doesn't, because both parties have put in so much time and effort into building that trust in the first place that when it breaks, it drops below that stranger level of trust, usually because of a shock or disappointment. And sometimes it just plummets far below. Rebuilding trust takes substantially longer than that initial building of it. This is because when it's broken, people are really hesitant or reluctant to give others the benefit of the doubt, like if they would, if that trust is high. So really, what does this have to do with council? The beauty of this graphic is that the concept also relates to your relationship that you have with your public and demonstrates how important the public trust is in their local government's leadership. To close out my presentation, I wanted to give a brief overview of the additional training and resources that we have available or that are available to you, not only from the ministry, but other parties or outside sources. So the first would be the Saskatchewan Municipal Peer Network. The Municipal Peer Network connects with municipal officials or administrators with highly experienced mentors who can provide advice and help resolve disputes. It's a mix of council members and administrators who are trained in coaching, communication, facilitation, and dispute resolution. They can be reached by phone and potentially making arrangements to meet in person, depending on if that's available to them. All conversations are confidential and they are free of charge. And if you visit their website that you see on the screen there, saskpurenetwork.org, you will find the contact information for the various mentors participating in this program. Another piece of training that is beneficial are the 10-minute trainers that we have available free online on saskatchewan.ca. These are training tools to help expand the knowledge of counselors and administrators. Each module does include short videos and questions that are designed to engage your entire council in discussions. There's 2 videos, one about council procedures bylaw and another about the roles and responsibilities of council and the administrator. And again, those can be found on saskatchewan.ca and just using the search bar using 10-minute trainers. And speaking of the province's website, you can find a large selection of guides, fact sheets, manuals, and general information about municipal administration. Things of interest, particularly to council members, is there's a council members handbook, conflict of interest and public disclosure statement information. Even for our other branches within our ministry, community planning and building and technical standards. We also do have various recorded webinars posted as well. Our website is quite large because it's the entire government of Saskatchewan housed on there, but searching municipal administration is a great place to start and bookmark for future reference. And I can't miss saying, don't forget to check your association's website for additional information, whether that be SARM or SUMA. Ombudsman Saskatchewan is another last page, I guess, of info. Sorry, Dustin, I'm a little bit quicker. Ombudsman Saskatchewan, they take complaints about municipal entities. They do have resources available also on their website that you might find helpful to you in understanding your role of, or understanding the role of the ombudsman as it relates to municipalities and making and communicating decisions fairly. The Office of the Saskatchewan Information and Privacy Commissioner, they oversee the privacy legislation for Saskatchewan and ensures that public bodies respect privacy and access rights of citizens. They also provide training sessions, and they have a slew of resources available on their website. And then lastly, Publications Saskatchewan houses all the publications created by our government ministries. Very last slide is our contact information. So again, I'm the manager of the advisory services unit of our advisory services and municipal relations branch. We have a small team of municipal advisors who have formal municipal experience, being past administrators in the field. Our calls are confidential, and our goal is to provide technical advice about municipal government and legislation. And with that being said, our phone number is listed on the screen as well as an email. And all of our calls or inquiries are confidential. And that is available to elected officials, administrators, and the public. Okay. So I'm sorry if I'm a little bit ahead of the scheduled time frame, Dustin, and I guess I'll let you take it from here.
No, that's great. This is wonderful. And of course, being a little bit ahead of schedule is, no one's ever complained to me about finishing early. So I'm sure that's the case in this as well. Really great information. We get all sorts of requests at SARM for info about conflict of interest and the various roles and responsibilities and the like. So you've touched on a lot of things, and I especially appreciate you and your staff's ability to be there to support counselors, administrators on a as needed basis too. So SARM has called your line a number of times actually as we've sought advice about how to support a member. And so yeah, it's a great partnership that's going on here, and we're really glad for the things that you shared. There are a few comments that have made their way into the Q&A, and so I'll read them, and you go ahead and give us your take on them. I've got a few more prepared as well that I know have been asked maybe in prior ones, but there's still lots of time if you do have a question to put it in the chat, and it'll get moved over to the Q&A for Megan to respond to. The first one is this, is a counselor who wants a new road that only serves his or her interest in a conflict of interest. What do
Okay.
you think of that, Megan?
Well, I feel like I need a timer or the Jeopardy music for this. So first off, and I'm sorry to disappoint, but I can't say if somebody's in a conflict or not. And going back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, the onus is on that council member. Now, in order to encourage that council member to declare, if you perceive that that individual is in a conflict of interest, you can use strategies of, having that informal conversation. If they decide, no, I'm not in a conflict, this isn't a personal benefit to me, and they participate in the meeting, you may ask to have a recorded vote on that motion. If you really want to pursue it, you can also go through the code of ethics in filing a complaint, or proceeding through the courts. But I apologize. I can't give an opinion on whether or not somebody is in a conflict of interest or not. The onus is on that council member. But if you believe that they are, there are options available for you to try and encourage that member to make that declaration of conflict and leave the meeting and the decision making on that item.
That's really helpful. Another one here for you, Megan. Why isn't there a process for declaring a conflict of interest while in camera? And maybe there is, I'm not sure.
Well, the declaration of conflict of interest should be done prior to going into in camera. Because to go into in camera, it should be for a particular purpose or reason. And So the declaration has to be made prior and that individual not participate at that point. This might be something that needs to be discussed more to get a little bit better background of what the situation was. Maybe it's something that while in camera, another topic came up. If that's the case, then that's really reserving that conversation for a separate in-camera session. But if that individual can call our office and we can chat about that a little bit more. But truly, any declarations of conflict of interest should occur prior to going into that in-camera session.
Right, right. So you have to have your topic fairly carefully
Mhm.
defined before you go into in camera so that you don't stray
Yeah.
into other things for which you haven't prepared, right?
Right. And think of
Okay.
the public's observing that.
Uh-huh.
If it's on your agenda that you are going to have, I don't know, let's use that road example that you're discussing road construction west of whatever section number, however you refer to it.
Mhm.
And that's something that's already on your agenda. The public's going to see that and they know that that council member might be on that road or benefit from that. They're probably going to expect that that declaration, and it should be done prior to that council or that closed session. But
That
yeah,
makes
give us a
sense.
call. Let's have a talk about it and get a better understanding of the situation.
Great, really good. Another question here. I'm under the impression that if no administrator is present at a meeting, that no meeting could occur. I was recently told that council can appoint another council member to take the meeting minutes. Is that true?
Okay, good question. So the legislation states that the administrator is responsible for the minutes being recorded. So it is the administrator's responsibility. However, they can also designate that to another municipal employee. That's the other key component. Taking minutes of a council meeting is the responsibility of the administrator of a municipal employee, not a council member. Council members, they cannot be municipal employees. So in larger municipalities, there may be an assistant administrator or like a CFO that may have to step in to record those minutes. As long as that the administrator has been given the ability to delegate those duties, that person can record those meeting minutes. It just can't be a council member.
Okay. Megan, I'm curious, you were on the front lines of this for quite a while, in your previous roles in advisory services. What sort of questions did you get asked when you were there? What sort of things would people call in and wonder about?
Um, I don't know, how much time do we have? uh, everything from conflict of interest to procedural issues at council meetings, um, how to, even election requirements.
Mhm.
So our focus today was on the Municipalities Act and that authority to govern. But our unit also oversees and provides technical advice on the Local Government Election Act, as well as the Tax Enforcement Act. So we do frequently get calls from both elected and the public and administrators about tax enforcement proceedings and how to carry through on those. So it's a whole gamut. And even when it comes to assessment, I think the key takeaway for the services that our office provides is that we provide technical advice. We don't make the decision on what you should or should not do, but we're going to have that conversation to help you come to I guess, a choice or a decision of how you want to proceed. Our focus is what's in municipal legislation. And because of our backgrounds, it helps us to better understand the situation that you're in, to know where to pinpoint or point you to in legislation to carry out that decision making.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm curious, if, again, you were on the front lines, both in advisory services, but also then as an ARM administrator.
Yeah.
Without outing your old counsel, which I would never want to do, of course, I'm curious about how, like, is there one thing that you see as just so critical to a successful council? What would be one thing that if you had only one message for every council to follow, what would you say to them?
Okay, I'm going to precursor this and say I loved my job. I loved the municipality that I worked with. And I hope they're watching, but if they're
Yeah.
not, if they're not, the takeaway that I would say is communication.
Hmm.
And it was earlier in the presentation about debate and discussion. And don't be afraid to have a difference of opinion. It's the way in which you present it, I think, is the most important to salvage that relationship. And, you know, good decisions come out of debate when you're on other sides of the fence, per se. So communicate really when you're in your council meetings. Also, remember, I could probably count on one hand how many times I had a public person sit in and observe a council meeting. And you should always operate your council meetings as if somebody's always sitting there and watching. Conduct yourself with respect and for other members, the public that are there, and they have a right to know what's being discussed. So communication is key.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It reminds me a little bit of early in your presentation, you talked about addressing conflict early so it didn't keep showing up and snowball.
Yeah.
Have you seen any particularly constructive ways of addressing conflict that you'd want to share with the group today?
Well, and I guess it depends on where that conflict is coming from. If it's with conflict with maybe a particular individual or ratepayer, is putting yourself in their shoes to understand where they're coming from and trying to better understand, asking curious questions to know what their position is and why it's impacting maybe the way that they're behaving with you. Um, and as a municipal body, and I might be digressing a little bit, but when it comes to administration as well, as recognizing that you might have some not so great interactions with some of the public that you serve, but you still have a duty as a public office to provide them what they have access to, coming to a council meeting, getting those minutes, looking at bylaws. Um, I think I kind of lost track of your question, Dustin, but it's resolving it early is talking about it and not being afraid to hear the hard answers, but also making sure that when you're making a decision on whatever it is, that you have all the information that you need to make a good decision. Just because it's put on your agenda today doesn't mean that maybe it's something you need to decide today. You can take your time. Maybe it's the next meeting. Give the administrator some time to prepare and do some research to bring back to your next council meeting for you to consider that.
Yeah, I take your point about the curiosity. If you can sort of control how maybe your own triggers might be going off and ask good questions, that can be super powerful, right? Because
Yeah.
you're showing empathy and showing that you care about what the other person thinks, even if maybe you don't necessarily agree. So that's really good advice, I think, Megan. I'm just looking at our question and answer roster here, and I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment from the audience. Maybe I'll give it just a moment and
Okay.
see if anyone else wants to squeeze one in. We do have a little bit of time. Maybe while I'm waiting, look at some of these other things that I was thinking about as you were speaking. We talked a little bit about folks who were preparing to run for office and ending up maybe getting voted in. Uh, Tell us about what are some really good reasons to run for office? What kind of folks thrive in municipal government in terms of their values and their motivations that do really well?
I think it really goes back to looking at one of my very first slides. I'll see if I can get to it here. Just don't mind the lots of clicking. Is the purposes of municipalities and how you align with what those purposes are. Local government is often called grassroots government, and you have a pulse on what your local needs are, but you also have to take into consideration, um, you know, that you're going to commit to these purposes, providing that good government, that you're going to commit to the services, facilities, and the other things that are in the opinion of council as a whole are necessary, that you're going to fulfill your legislative obligations and maintaining a safe and viable community. I mean, these are, again, they're very powerful statements and overreaching and broad statements, but as if you're going to run for office, these are things that you need to be prepared to look at in the grand scheme of things throughout your term and keep it as a reminder. We actually used this slide in a presentation this spring that we had with municipal administrators across the province. We did a workshop tour, and some made the comment like, this would be great to post in our council as that constant reminder of why we're here. And we know a lot of municipalities have done strategic planning and have their own mission statement and goals. Absolutely. If you're looking at running for office, speak with the municipal administration and the existing council about what are the plans for the municipality.
Yeah, that's great. When I read those, I think, you're placing the common good above your own interests, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful thing. And sadly, it's not as common as it ought to be sometimes, right?
Yeah.
But this is really good reminder. I didn't see any other questions come in, and so I think we can wrap up this part of the session, Megan. And I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. I know that you worked hard on upping your presentation and changing it up a little bit here. And I also am aware that you're just starting a new job and you launched into this session with us today too. So all those things are just I'm really grateful for that, and I look forward to working with you on the years ahead as we continue to offer municipal leaders roles and responsibilities together.
Likewise, thank you very much for the opportunity. Enjoy the rest of the session. I'm going to sign off now. And please, if you do have any questions that you didn't have a chance to ask, give our office a call. And whether it be myself or another one of our advisors, we're more than happy to help you with your questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you.
Well, with that, I'd like to bring our next presenters forward. It's a little bit of a different format for this next session. This is entitled Things Every Elected Official Needs to Know About Public Sector Procurement. And so we've got two folks today on the call. There is Tyler Hannemann and Amanda Kozak, and I'll share a little bit about their bios shortly. In this municipal leaders roles and responsibilities section, we also try to think about like what are some things that we notice that different councils are working with. What are some things that maybe are emerging in their world that we want to make sure that they've got some education on. And public sector procurement is a huge one. The expectations and the importance and the implications of doing public sector procurement well are right through the roof, and it's become one of our top priorities, even as we become aware of it at SARM. So the two folks who will be having a little dialogue together today, Tyler Hannemann, MBA, is now the General Manager of Canoe Procurement Group of Canada. Congratulations on the promotion, by the way there, Tyler. Prior to his role, he served as Manager of Supplier Relations for Canoe, where he managed over 330 supplier contracts, oversaw the procurement department within Canoe, and analyzed trends in the public procurement sector. Tyler's team developed Canoe's programs and trained suppliers nationally. He holds a Master of Business Administration designation. And beyond the office, Tyler is a devoted husband and loving father to his two children who enjoy having him coach their Little League sports teams. And working with Tyler today is SARM's own Amanda Kozak. Amanda is the member purchasing advisor at SARM. She's been with SARM for 12 years and is your first point of contact for any procurement-related inquiries. She has her diploma in supply chain management and is currently pursuing her supply chain management professional designation, the coveted SCMP. And in Amanda's spare time, she enjoys spending time outdoors with her husband and her two daughters. So I will pass it off to Amanda and Tyler, You'll have opportunity as an audience to listen to their interactions, and then we'll get lots of questions, I'm sure, about public sector procurement and how that relates to rural municipal councils and their administrators. So take it away.
Thanks, Dustin.
Okay, thank you, Dustin. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Dustin mentioned, Tyler and I are going to talk about what every elected official needs to know about public sector procurement. I know this is everyone's favorite topic, so we will try to touch on some important topics that we feel will assist you and your RM in their procurement process. So we're going to jump right in and talk about what procurement really means. So procurement is really just the process of acquiring goods and services, and it involves various steps from identifying the need for a particular product or service to the final delivery and payment. A well-done procurement process ensures that the best use of ratepayer dollars is used. So I know most RMs have engaged in some sort of procurement process, whether it's from buying a grader or looking to hire someone for snow removal.
Yeah, and you're definitely bang on there, Amanda, with procurement. Procurement's very much a broad term, and as Amanda said, it's very much how a municipal entity or how a public entity buys anything. Obviously, procurement happens in the private sector as well, but for us today, it's really focusing on how should government buy, how should SARM members buy, and just bleeding into Megan's presentation there off the top. Ultimately, when you're acting as an RM or any municipal agency, the ultimate person or people you're answering to is that ratepayer base, right? We're here to be stewards of the public dollar to ensure that we're getting the best value with that public dollar across our spend. So in Canada, there's many different rules around procurement. There's provincial legislation that defines how public entities act, and that differs province to province sometime. And then there's some overarching trade agreements that affect specific regions, all of Canada, to international trade agreements that can affect how municipalities function and how they go about pursuing goods and services in the space. So we're gonna hopefully have this great conversation and make it a little more interactive and things like that. So that's
Yeah,
kind of
and
procurement.
oftentimes, you hear that the procurement process in the public sector is so much more rigorous from the procurement in the private sector. And I know one of the key differences is the open, fair, and transparent process that is required from the public sector, which allows them for the equal opportunity for all of the suppliers to bid on the goods and services. So I know this should be at the forefront for every procurement. Tyler, do you want to touch more on what that means?
Yeah, so kind of looking at that public versus private piece is private procurement. When you're either buying for your personal life or your family life, there really is no rules and restrictions on how you can go out and buy. You can go, if you're looking for a new car, you can go to the auto dealer, various auto dealerships, pick your favorite, doesn't matter. Nobody's constraining you. Nobody's going to call you up and say, hey, Amanda, why did you go with the Ford instead of the GM or the Dodge or what have you? And same on a business side of it. You can choose and you can evaluate what's best for your business and make that decision. Sometimes price plays a role in it. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's relationship based and things like that. When we're talking about that public sector procurement, that really does take a back seat. There are those rules in place, and it becomes very much so bleeding into that open, transparent process. You need to show why you picked a certain supplier. If you are looking at buying a vehicle, and just with 1-ton truck or half-ton truck prices today, they would be over threshold on a lot of trade agreements. Is how is your municipality going out and buying that? Are they, are you getting quotes? Are you going direct to a supplier? Like there's very different ways. You can't just pick up the phone, call Brant and say, John, hey Brant, I would like to buy a motor grader. It's a little more open and transparent than that. So and the biggest thing, I guess, with public sector procurement is you want to ensure that there's open opportunity and there's equal opportunity for suppliers to access, the government funds available. This doesn't just affect municipal purchases. I should add that in. It does affect the different entities, governmental entities across. So schools, healthcare, typically health and social services. We'll touch on this as well. Provinces and the federal government all have very similar rules and regulation kind of in that space.
Yeah, and I know when talking about the interprovincial trade agreements, the New West Partnership Trade Agreement in particular sets rules for the public entities.
Yeah.
There are thresholds that are set out for when you need to conduct a competitive procurement. In the public sector for goods and services, it's 75,000, and for construction, it's 200,000. So what this means is that anything at or above the threshold must follow the open, fair, and transparent procurement process, as Tyler had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, definitely. And just on that New West Trade Partnership Agreement piece, everybody's favorite thing to do, I'm sure, is to follow up and read up on trade agreements. But so that agreement is an agreement between Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and BC. For those perhaps maybe some older individuals in the crowd, perhaps is the Tilma agreement was its predecessor, and that was between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. Manitoba wasn't involved in that one. And really, these agreements are not to make your lives more difficult as municipal councilors or as municipalities more difficult. Really, these agreements are designed to increase market access in between the provinces, to harmonize regulations across provinces. So if you are that private sector business entity, the rules should be the same in Saskatchewan as in Alberta on how to purchase if those threshold numbers are hitting that 75K for goods and services or 200 for construction projects. It also should increase competition. It should give you access to, those 4 provinces, at least for vendors or suppliers to come in and bid on your opportunity. The other important thing is in this legislation, it has dispute resolution mechanisms. So what that means is if a procurement that your municipality is conducting doesn't go properly, maybe there's a legal challenge, maybe a supplier feels like they weren't treated fairly or what have you, there's actual legislation in place that you should have within your procurement policy that lays out what to do. How long do you have to keep? What's the challenge period for these suppliers to come and challenge a bid? What does your debrief look like? All those things within a procurement that your administration should be, up to date and familiar with. So they're big documents. They're not the best to read, but if you ever want a more in-depth conversation on the New West Trade Partnership, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between Canada and Europe, I'd love to chat. That's my favorite topic.
Yeah, and you mentioned the procurement policy, which is also very important. Every RM should really have a procurement policy as it lays out the process for the decisions around what to buy and how to purchase it. It also sets the expectations for your internal and external stakeholders. It sets the foundation as well for in which way your RFPs and tenders are structured. So there is an important piece with that procurement policy. And Tyler can also talk about why an RM might want to consider implementing such a policy.
Yeah, definitely. And every municipality, any public entity, I feel should have a procurement policy. It guides everything. Even though we have these trade agreements, you should have that internal policy. What do you do if a purchase that is $74,999? How do you conduct that? And having that open and transparent, to your ratepayers and to suppliers is super important. And to bring it back to that open, transparent, and fair, and transparent, Amanda, that's really the foundation of every good procurement policy, I feel. Being open is showing the public and the suppliers in the marketplace what is the opportunity available for that RM. What is happening, what are we buying, what are we looking for? Are we looking for a commodity such as tires or a piece of equipment? Are we looking for a service? What is the project we are bidding? So being open on how the process is going to look is super important, and that can be laid out within a procurement policy. So if it's under, sometimes I see if it's under 25,000, the policy is we're going to do 3 quotes at local businesses and then go from there. It could be more comprehensive that entities are going to go out and post an RFP regardless if it's over $10,000, a request for proposal. So these can be wide ranging. There's no defined, piece on a procurement policy, but it is important to capture it. On that fair piece is you want to ensure that entities, suppliers, and vendors can access and have kind of that equal opportunity to bid or to access, an opportunity with your municipality. And the other piece of that is transparent, and this should also be laid out in your policy is make sure that you're tracking what you're doing. So if you are going out for quotes, recording like who you sent out for quotes, what did they respond back? And then your procurement policy should define how you're choosing from those quotes. With RFPs, typically that's going to be posted on SAS tenders. There's a little bit of a paper trail there with it. But posting your awards, posting, what happened with the RFP, was it a success? There's obviously some things in there that you can't post, sensitive price information or things that maybe you can't make public, but you want to be as transparent as you can, not only for the suppliers that are participating within your procurement to understand maybe why they weren't successful, but also to your ratepayers. Again, at the end of the day, you want to show that you're doing your due diligence as a municipality, as a public entity, that you're ensuring you're getting the best value for that public dollar. And really, that's what your procurement policy should outline, and that's what the goal of it should be. It should be how, like you said, how we're conducting our business to ensure that we're getting the best value possible for our ratepayers and for the people in our communities.
Yeah, and with the public procurement process, I know there's so many steps involved. It can seem, very long at times, from the planning, budgeting stages. Those are typically kind of what happens early on. And then, making sure you follow all the regulatory compliance along the way through your procurement process, the tendering, the evaluation and award of the contract, and then also the contract management afterwards, which is something that, a lot of people, tend to kind of forget about. They think once the contract is awarded, that's it. But there should be contract management after a contract is awarded. Many hours are often spent from, doing all of these stages. Typically, I think, the average person spends over 200 hours between the planning, and the award stages. Tyler, do you have anything else to add to this?
Yeah, definitely. So, because it's counselor education piece and that it's, what's the role of a council in a procurement? And really you do get involved right at that first step. And the first step is that planning and budgeting piece. So what does your municipality need? What's of importance? Do we need to buy a new grader this year? Do we need, new contracting for snow clearing, road maintenance, things like that? So, it's super important that you're involved in that phase. You want to set the standards, set the service level for your municipality, and really set the budget for your administration to go out and conduct, their side of the procurement. With that, it's going to be, going into the next step, you want to check the legal and regulatory compliance. So what's going to be the spend? We've done the budget, we've done the planning. Are you over threshold? Okay, maybe in this example, we're buying a new piece, a motor grader that's going to be over that 75K. So we're going to have to post on SAS tenders. So we look at that, and you're going to have to build out an RFP or a tender document. Typically, we see the trend shifting to RFPs, which is request for proposal. And you're going to have, some legal requirements, some contractual obligations. Obviously, you're going to have to spec out the machine that you're looking at, and you don't want to make the spec too narrow, or else you can get accused of favoring one supplier over another. So it's a pretty complex piece. After you have your document set, you have to post that to SAS tenders, and you need that open for a set amount of time. Typically that's a month to 45 days. So when you're in that phase of it, you're going to be getting questions on your RFP. Hey, clarification on this spec, clarification on what this clause means, other things like that, in which your administration is going to be answering and posting addendums, things like that. Once the opportunity is closed, you're going to move into that evaluation and award. This should be done, the evaluation should be done by administration, talking conflict of interest and things like that, is you really want administration to do that evaluation based upon your procurement policy, based upon the requirements laid out in your RFP or tender. And then once they go through the evaluation, sometimes there's some negotiation with suppliers. You get to that award phase. So then you award a supplier. With that award, you're posting on SAS tenders, and you're going into, signing a contract. Typically, that's when councils get back involved, is at that step, so they can sign off and say, yeah, this process was done appropriately, and we're signing the PO, allocating the funds to go buy the piece of equipment, the grader in this case. So for equipment or commodities, there may be a little bit of contract management with it, depending on the size, the scope of the work. But that contract management piece really comes into effect for services. If you're contracting somebody out to do waste management or road maintenance or road clearing, you want to have your administration have touch points with those entities recorded, making sure it's transparent, so that you can ensure that the people that you're employing or paying through the competitively bid process are meeting the expectations of the contract, and they're delivering on the value that was promised within those RFPs and or tenders. So all of that leads into that transparency and accountability of it. So if you are doing a road maintenance contract, typically those will be term contracts, a number of years. Once it comes up, you need to have something in place where you can say, this contractor was really good, and here's the things to prove it, or this contractor didn't perform up to what they promised. So when we go out to RFP again, we may have to take some of that into consideration. If there's multiple bids, and it's having that conversation of, you didn't live up to what you promised last time, and how does that affect it moving forward. So lots of different pieces, but it is a long process, like you said, Amanda. The average we say here at Canoe is 255 hours typically it takes in administrative time. So you can think of how many things your entity buys as a municipality, and it's wide ranging, and those administrative hours do rack up quite quickly. So having solid foundation, having a good policy, having good efficiencies built in definitely can ease that administrative pressure.
Yeah, and I also do find, so many people tend to kind of get confused on, when to use the RFP, which is the request for proposal, versus a tender. Typically, the outcome for using each of these is quite different, actually. RFPs are used, when you want to evaluate on other criteria other than price. You want to look at past performance, warranty of a supplier, delivery, things like that. And tenders are typically, when you're only looking at price. And tenders are generally awarded for lowest price. I do know, sometimes, people will put out a tender document and will have in there, we're only going to award, we're not basing this on price. But if you don't include, any evaluation criteria in your tender document, then you are obligated to award that to the lowest price.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And one of the ways I describe tender, when doing talks like this, is it's a very rigid document, and truly the contractual essence of that really begins the minute you post it. So tenders are typically referred to as contract A, contract B documents. Contract A is the tender document. So that lays out, as you said, we will be awarding low price. It has all the pieces in there that proponents need to meet and need to agree to, and that results directly into contract B. So it's very, very rigid. There's been a big pivot in Canada, I would definitely say, over the past 15 years to the past decade with entities, and they are shifting more to that request for proposal, that RFP process. The RFP, you can still do a low bid within it. Typically these have a scoring metric that's evaluated on different criteria. So you could put price is 80% of the document. So you can still play with it as you wish. It just allows you more flexibility to work with your suppliers and with the entities responding to the RFP, because they allow for, it's a proposal, it's not a contract submission, if you will. So typically where we're seeing tenders used today is in that commodity space, like you said. So we're going out, we're buying, this thing. It's very specific, and we don't care about anything else. We just want to ensure that we're getting the lowest price. Again, I do feel like 90% of the procurements I see now within Canada are in that RFP document where, they want to have a little bit of, so you go through the evaluation, do the initial evaluation after a RFP closes. Maybe there's a little clarification, a little negotiation to see maybe you didn't capture the scope of the project totally and completely within your RFP document. So you can have that clarification and provide that clarification to all proponents and move on with that. So it's really the technical side of procurement between the RFP and the tender, but I would definitely, recommend and lean on that RFP over a tender document.
Yeah, and the best value approach, seems to be shifting more. It's becoming more common. And that's when, you would use that RFP, because then you can include that best value in that document. And best value really means, again, you're looking for other things that you want to consider when making your purchase other than price. So when you're putting together that RFP document, you want to determine what's important to you to achieve, in order to achieve that best value. That would mean adding in the evaluation criteria and a scoring matrix to achieve the best value that you feel is best value. So, those are all things to consider when putting together your RFP. What is best value? What do you want to include in this document in order to achieve that?
Yeah, definitely. And to that, I like to lean on my my equipment suppliers and my equipment experience in this space. And you can relate it to your personal life. There's a time and a place to buy, to buy the cheapest option, to buy the lowest cost piece. But we often know that there's a different piece with it. If you look at buying a car, maybe you've had a great experience, you have a great relationship with the local dealer. Maybe it's a Ford. I'm a Ford guy. You have a great relationship. The service people. You're going to get well taken care of, and that shifts your individual personal preference to go there because you know that. So within an RFP document, service is a big component when purchasing heavy equipment. Many of you probably, if you're not aware, you will be in your municipal space. There's a lot of different equipment suppliers out there: John Deere, Caterpillar, XCMG, Hyundai, Hitachi. The list goes on and on, depending what type of piece you're buying. So when I talk to municipalities and I talk to entities about it, it's price is price. It is important. You do have budgets, but if you buy a piece that's low price and there's no service component or capability, you're going to pay for that in the long run. So when you're evaluating when you're creating your RFP documents, or you're creating, this procurement opportunity, you want to take that into account. How are you going to service? What is that service call going to look like? Is there a set service rate, to get you out to fix our machine, to keep our operations running? All those things can be included within an RFP document. If they answer back and say, well, our nearest, service person is in Calgary, that's a minimum 3-hour drive to get to Saskatchewan. So, they could score really low on that metric. And then they could have somebody, yes, we're, 30 minutes to an hour away. So they would score higher, and you can evaluate and base recommendations on that, because within that best value approach, it's all about that life cycle of the contract, of the piece of equipment, or of the contracted services. So you have to take into all those things into account, because you need to be operational. You need to provide the service to your ratepayers. So it's great to save that money up front, but if the machine's broken and you're waiting for parts or for service or what have you, you're not operating, and that cost is being added up on the back end that you may not be seeing.
Yeah, and to add to that best value piece, like Tyler had mentioned, there's value to having, that guy that can come out the next day to fix your grader rather than, waiting a week or two, right? So if you, include that in your document, there's definitely value in being able to get those services right when you need them rather than having to wait.
Yeah, I would say, just for clarification on that, most trade agreements do have you can't specify a local purchase or a local buy, but you can define that service component, and evaluate and rate it based upon a comparison model of what's going to be best for your entity.
And in talking about all these, the procurement steps that are involved within RFPs and tenders, I know the role that the administrators and council members play in procurement processes are different, as they should each have a specific role to play in the procurement process. Oftentimes, you hear council will set the budget and direction for what is to be purchased, and then the administrator will go and follow through, all the steps and the proper procurement process. Then we'll conduct the evaluation and execute the contract.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're bang on there, Amanda. So that really is the role of council, is to set that budget for administration to execute. So you guys are the strategists. You're the service level setters. You're all that for your municipality. You set that strategic direction, and you approve the policies. You approve and set the procurement policy for your organization. So you really set the rules of the road. You said everything that you want administration to execute, and you let them execute, and you should have that kind of trust in your staff. Once that RFP is out, you do kind of take a step back once that budget's been approved. And again, you probably won't come back in, or you really shouldn't be too involved. You shouldn't be evaluating RFPs, things like that. That should be an administrative role, as laid out in a good solid procurement policy. And then, you often come is to that final approval of the process that administration has undergone to result in the award and eventual purchase of something.
Yeah, and more often these days, people are hearing more about the cooperative purchasing, and there's a time and place for cooperative purchasing for sure. And there's definitely key benefits for rural municipalities and organizations in the public sector. Accessing a buying group saves you the time for having to do your own tender, as the tender's already been done for you. So you can just, call up a supplier, get a price, and go from there. Seeing as Canoe is a cooperative purchasing group, maybe you could talk about why an RM would want to use a buying group rather than going through their own procurement process.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe for those on the call, Canoe is a direct partner with SARM. We operate as their buying arm, I guess, or their cooperative arm, if you will. So if you do use our programs, that does go back and supports SARM as an association. So we're very proud of that partnership. Canoe is a nonprofit. We are a governmental entity. We do operate coast to coast to coast. We're everywhere in Canada, except for in Quebec. So we definitely feel like when we do an RFP and we do it on behalf of our membership, like Amanda said, it is, a government entity doing a procurement. So we follow very strict rules. All the trade agreements we try to meet. The CFTA is kind of our guiding light in a lot of ways, that Canadian Free Trade Agreement. So we do take it very seriously, and we get our process audited and checked quite often. So where does GPO fit within a municipal space is very much a tool in a toolbox kind of analogy, I would say. It can be very useful. As we said, the average procurement's 255 hours. Depending on the size of your municipality, or maybe it's not even a size question, maybe it's staff and staff capability, what you have going on. It could be that useful tool. As Dustin said off the top, there's 330 contracts that we have within our scope. So there's quite a big supplier breadth. So we're often a misconception, I would say, of group purchasing is that we're the cheapest option out there, and that's definitely not the case, I would say, in most often. Not that we're expensive, but we're competitive for what you're looking at. So oftentimes, if you're looking at one of our contracts and you're trying to use it, we often say it's going to be the same price, maybe a little better than if you went to RFP or tender on your own. So that huge big savings that you can expect typically are in that soft cost of it. It is the administrative time. It's leveraging the RFP and the contract that Canoe and SARM has posted on behalf of the membership. And it allows you to navigate the space. So we have typically multiple contracts with suppliers within a category. So for your administration, they can go and ask and have those deeper context or deeper communications with the suppliers to ensure that they're scoping out or they're getting the best best piece of equipment or best service provider in the space for the municipality, and really focus on that best value approach. You know, with the procurement, with the GPO kind of model, the group purchasing organization model, it is we've taken price out of the discussion because you know what the price is, right? So the price is defined. It's not like they can change it too much, but you can have the discussions on service. You can have the discussions, you know, how it's going to fit for your municipality, what's the value that supplier is going to bring, why they should choose, you know, why you folks should choose that supplier on this, you know, Canoe SARM contract over, you know, going out and doing their own RFP. So it's a really powerful tool for entities to leverage. I relate it to oftentimes the provincial governments will often do RFPs on behalf of municipalities, or they'll do their own RFP and extend those contracts out to municipalities. So on the compliance side, or on that side of it, we're formatted very similar. It's a standing offer agreement that that entities can leverage and use. I will say, if you are looking at procurement policy for your organizations, or things like that, you can include a GPO or using, you know, SARM / Canoe within that policy, so that it does, you know, empower your administration to execute or even look at those options, you know, as a choice.
Yeah, so moving into some supply chain issues. I know everyone's, I'm sure,
Whoa.
experienced,
I don't know if there are issues. I'll get an update.
well, issues and updates, I would say. You know, I'm sure everyone's experienced, you know, some sort of delay in, you know, receiving, you know, a product or a service in the last couple of years. And unfortunately, we're still having, you know, there's still some major effects happening on the product availability side. With the inflationary pressures, people are really starting to plan, you know, 2 years out, you know, for their purchases. So if your know your RM is going to need a grader in 2026, I would start planning for that now. You know, just that you could, you know, possibly get it on time, you know, not guaranteeing that's going to happen, but just start thinking about that now. We're also hearing more about best value, as well as a lot around social and sustainable procurement. What are your thoughts on what's happening in the supply chain world right now?
Yeah, so definitely to echo kind of what you're saying. So COVID was COVID. It affected a lot of things in the world. Number one, maybe not number one, I shouldn't say that. A big part of it was that supply chain piece. From freight, from shipping, from all that kind of logistical transportation of goods and services globally really affected everything. A chip manufacturer shut down in Taiwan led to thousands of vehicles, thousands of Ford trucks not being able to be shipped out to customers, and their yards and stock being overflowed with inventory without being able to go out without certain components. So it's a big mess. It was a big mess. It's getting better typically. So what we've seen from kind of our supplier network over the past year, 2 years, is the lead time, and you mentioned graders, going down from an 18-month to an 8-month kind of supply. So though they're shrinking, the lead time portion of it, which is great, on some purchases. So we are seeing that pressure kind of alleviate. The other side of it, though, is the price discussion. So with the pricing, we haven't seen a reduction with price. I believe in talking with, again, with suppliers and with entities, it's really that supply and demand conversation. There's been so much pent up demand over COVID, such huge supply strain issues that demand is still at an all-time high. As and then as the economy slows down, I'll put it that way. I don't want to, put recession or things like that out on the table, but it's slowing. I know Stats Canada, or I believe it's Stats Canada, put out the October growth this morning. So the economy in Canada is slowing. So hopefully that does alleviate some of the demand. It's not a good thing to go through a recession, but it could alleviate some of that demand, which could affect prices coming down. But it's not going to be an immediate thing. So is that going to maybe end of Q3, Q4 in 2024? But again, it's still so much uncertainty in the market. You look at the geopolitics of the world, what's happening out in the Middle East, and many OEM, many manufacturing is getting an increase in military spending and things like that, and allocations. So that does bump, the commercial side of it, because they will give priority to some of those manufacturers. So that's eating up some supply. There's still just a lot of uncertainty in the market. So the other piece I did want to touch on, and Amanda, you mentioned it with lead time being typically, over a year or two, is really looking at your asset management, getting your administration to go through and see when replacement was supposed to be due for pieces of equipment or even buildings, things like that, because you do want to have a good picture. So if your fire truck is, due to be replaced next year or the year after, you should be putting in an order in now, because if you put an order in for a fire truck today, you are looking at a 2 to 3 year wait. I'm not sure if everybody's a new counselor. I hope I get to keep doing this and you're all on in 3 years from now. But sometimes, a purchase that a council has approved, and I've seen this across the country, that product is being delivered sometimes when those council isn't even a part of it anymore. So, it does go back to that procurement policy piece. I know a lot of the provinces had legislation around what municipalities could do for capital spending and things like that, where you had to spend it within a calendar year and not bring it into the next year's budget. Because of the insanity of the world that was the last couple of years, there's been you were allowed to do some of those types of things, and that still remains. So be proactive in your budgeting, have that foresight within to see what your municipality needs, and you might have to put your name on some pieces if you are looking to replace sooner than later. Yeah, so I guess to shift to that best value procurement, that is a big shift. I think we've talked about it quite a bit today. And it's looking at the holistic ownership of a piece of equipment, or that holistic relationship with any supplier that you're using. So it's just shifting away from thinking low price is what is going to be the best thing for my municipality. So if you have any questions, if you want to talk about how to evaluate, what kind of criteria are good to evaluate upon, please don't hesitate to reach out to SARM or somebody out at Canoe. The last piece is the social and sustainable procurement. So this is a very hot topic. It is definitely a common question I get across Canada on how to do it, what it looks like, what does it mean? Can I put it in an RFP? Can I put it in a tender? All that kind of stuff. And it is really a new space. I'll say that for entities. There's definitely things you can put within a procurement, within an RFP or a tender. The thing is, you don't want to be constraining yourself, I guess, with those things. So on the social side of procurement, if you are looking at engaging with Indigenous owned business or minority or women owned businesses, you can highlight that as a metric that you would like to work with. Typically, you can't score or provide points to that. So it could be a value add You know, oftentimes I see it with manufacturers or OEMs. So maybe, you know, do you have policies or procedures if that's important to you? Can you highlight what you're doing working with those groups? That kind of thing. On the sustainable side, there's many different ways to look at it, I guess, to not dodge the question, but to be fair with it. You can do environmental spending. You can look at sustainable spending in that regard. You can look at fleet electrification. You can look at, you know, using green cleaning products, things like that. They can help you hit maybe your own individual municipalities' sustainability goals. So you can shift on what you're buying and how to meet it in that regard. You can definitely shift what suppliers are doing, but I think you want to be realistic. The other thing you can do is you can start asking, much like on the social side, what are you doing as a supplier to be a sustainable company? Do you have recycling program? Do you do you have a net zero goal? Do you have, you know, questions like that? Again, I wouldn't get too much into the scoring of it. I would look at it as more of a value add piece that you could use as a, you know, a check mark or a pro for a respondent, as opposed to an actual scored criteria. Oftentimes these questions on social and sustainable procurement or social and sustainable goods and services are formatted as a survey within a document. So it's very yes, no type questions. And then you can put that as a scoring metric where it is a mandatory piece you have to fill out, and then kind of go from there.
I think that kind of concludes our presentation. So unless you have something else to add, Tyler, we're open to questions.
Hey, thanks you
Sure.
both. I'm really grateful for your time today, guys. Really interesting discussion. This stuff on procurement. It's there's so much to know, and so it's just great to have folks like you, Tyler and Amanda, and your organizations even to be able to rely on. So RMs can contact you. I know I think Ainsley Murdoch was going to be on our call today, but she's another person from Canoe that could be contacted from our members if they have questions about these kinds of things. I know Amanda loves taking calls and will connect either with our Canoe colleagues or be able to work on those things directly. Looking for questions. Didn't see any come up in the Q&A just yet.
Means we answered them all, Amanda. We did such a good job.
Well, you know, I was jotting some questions down myself and I
Oh,
kept
okay.
crossing them off because you guys kept getting them. I'm like, oh, okay, I was
Oh,
going to ask
perfect.
about that. You talked about it already. So,
Yeah, maybe Dustin, just as we're waiting, I do, you know, just to maybe wrap up or summarize, you know, for these counselors on the call is, you know, go back to your counties, go back to or not your counties, your RMs, sorry. I'm out in Alberta, I'm used to the counties. Go back to your RMs, ask administration about the policies, you know, review it yourself, see what's in there, see if it needs to be updated. Look at the last time it was updated. Ask administration how procurement's done today. Do they have standard documents? You know, are you posting on SAS tenders? Questions like that definitely you know, can help start a conversation about procurement and how things are done within your municipality.
I'm curious with so many things to learn about procurement, what opportunities are there for our administrators to learn and for counselors to learn? Are there training opportunities? Are there networking opportunities? Where do they go? Maybe Amanda, do you want to take that first? Then I'll
Yeah.
jump over to Tyler.
Yeah, I'll take this one. So, well, for the second year in a row, we had offered a one-day procurement boot camp. It was open for administrators, and we held it the day before our midterm convention. So we are planning on holding that again next year. And we do realize that this is a particular need, you know, that council and administrators are looking for. So SARM is aware of that, and we are looking at other ways, you know, that we can educate council and administrators on procurement best practices. We're even considering some practical training possibly in the near future. So we do know this is a need and we're working on it. So we will, please be patient with us, and we will we will get there. But your RM can, call me for any questions that they have, on procurement best practices, or if they have questions on, putting together some other documents, or, how to, put together an evaluation criteria. I'm definitely here to help.
And Tyler, curious from you folks at Canoe, I know you've got done lots of support for municipalities. What sort of training or learning opportunities does Canoe offer, or advising opportunities for that matter?
Yeah, so definitely, we definitely have, at Ainsley Murdoch, you mentioned, can come in and help guide, guide the SOC, same, very similar. I know she works a lot with Amanda, in that regard. Typically, we do partner with some associations across Canada. So we do look at that. So we are a part of and I'm blanking on the name outside of the acronym. NIGP is an international one that's big in the States, that we do partner with, and they are very procurement focused on that regard. The Ontario Public Buyers Association, it's another organization we do leverage a lot of their material. And then there are some NIGP chapters actually across Canada that we do work with. So if you ever are looking for more resources or things like that, Amanda or Ainsley on the Canoe team are a great first call, and we can point you in the right direction.
Great. No, that's great. Had a few questions come in here while we were chatting. The first one, can urban municipalities access Canoe? And I'll let you handle that one, Tyler.
Yes.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, no, definitely. So Canoe membership, because we are that governmental entity, pretty much the only people we can't, help out or offer contracts to is anybody in the private space. If you pay tax, we can't do it. So if you're a school division, if you're an urban, if you're an RM, if you're any kind of in the match sector, we call it, municipal, academic, schools, health and social services, you can access a Canoe contract and become a Canoe member.
Awesome. There's a follow-up that just popped in there. It's still on the same topic, so I'll just keep going with that, Tyler. What about SUMA's program through Kinetic? Are you able to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I can for sure. I'll be nice too. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
No, yeah. So I would say it's a competitive GP. It's a competitor in the space of ours, if you will. So they do very similar. They're a group purchasing organization. They go out to RFP on behalf of their membership. They establish, standing offer agreements with suppliers as well. What I do tell any municipality looking at multiple GPOs is go through the whole process, go through their RFP documents, go through their evaluation, go through the contract, and see if it's the best fit for your municipality.
Great. No, that's really good. And so generous to speak that way of a competitor. So no, I think there's a fair bit of mutual cooperation even in this space. So it's kind of neat to see that taking place. Next question is probably for Amanda. It's a SARM question. Does SARM have a procurement policy template or sample for RMs to use and tweak for their own?
So SARM is currently working on a policy template. So we don't currently have one available, but we are working on a template, and we will get that out to you when we have it completed. It's going to have to go, through a few rounds of, having our legal counsel have a look at it and things like that. So it will take some time, but we will get it out when it's available.
Yeah, good question. Good answer. Another one here. I'm not sure who's the best to ask. I'll throw it out and you guys can decide. We have a clause in procurement to the effect of if a local company is within 10% of the best bid, we go local. If we're clear with that, is it okay? Who wants to give free legal advice? I mean, this is not legal advice. This is being recorded, not legal advice. What's your take, though? What's your take, Tyler or Amanda?
My take would be it would depend on the dollar value of the bid of the project. So if you are over that $75,000 threshold, you cannot give any preference to a local bid. That's the rules. That's my personal opinion. What I would say, to be fully compliant, transparent would be you should get a legal review of that and get that opinion. From Canoe's standpoint, upon our interpretation of the trade agreements, that would be in violation. If you're below that threshold, I believe if you are open, fair, and transparent with it, you would be free to include that within your procurement policy. But once you start hitting those numbers, then that's where I would say no.
Okay. Amanda, anything to add? I'm
No, I
assuming
think-
you're on the same page, so.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as Tyler. Yeah, with those trade agreements and stuff, I would say that if you're at that threshold or above that, you wouldn't be able to include that in your document.
That's one thing we hear a lot of, I hear a lot of, is that the public procurement approach often takes away from local businesses. But I did hear you in your presentation discuss ways that you can build your RFP to support local, and some of that came out to like service was a really important one. Are there other things you'd want to reinforce for you know, helping to keep business in the proximity of the municipality?
Yeah, definitely. And I do get this a lot with kind of our contracts across Canada on the Canoe side, because we do operate typically with the manufacturers. And if typically our contracts are with the manufacturers. So you are typically engaging with local dealers that sell and support those products. So, to plug the GPO spend a bit, you can keep that business local if you so choose, if there is a GPO contract that you would like to leverage on that front. So the service component's big, transportation's big. We have a fuel program. Sometimes the local hauler has a lot of tanks in the area and he's going to be able to get you the best price. And that is it could be a price discussion. So sometimes it's that logistics piece, servicing contracts, things like that. But you do have that piece for your ratepayers, right? It's great to support local business, but not all local business is on the up and up, and sometimes they can take advantage of a municipality. I'm not saying that they ever would, but you do want to keep it honest. If you're paying a 40% premium to go local, is that in the best interest of the community? And those are the kind of the questions you'd have to evaluate, and that's why you want to be fair and open and transparent with things.
I like your point there too, Tyler, of maybe some of those, if it's a branch of a bigger company that's local, they may already have that contract through Canoe. So check in with them and see if that's a possibility. Maybe they already have something set up.
Definitely.
Anything to add, Amanda? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Sorry.
I think Tyler covered kind of everything. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Good. Not seeing any further questions. There's still a couple of minutes. If someone wanted to add something else, happy to hear that. Tyler and Amanda, you guys talked a little bit about some of the stuff on the horizon with public sector procurement. That was really helpful. Some of the interest in more of the social stuff, some of the sustainability stuff, that's really helpful. Are you aware of any changes or upcoming events in like the federal or the provincial systems that might be worth considering? Are there SAS tenders is here to stay? Are there other things going on?
Yeah, so I don't know. Sorry, man. I jump in ahead of you all the time. So there is and I'm blanking on what actually they call it. So I apologize, but it is the federal government has a prerogative or a direction to have a single point of access for procurement in Canada. That's coming through. It's not going to replace SAS tenders, but it is going to pull everything off of SAS tenders onto a site called, I believe it's canadabuys.gov.ca. So that piece is happening. It's been rolled out and adopted by provinces at different speeds and rates and things like that. So I'm maybe I should have looked it up. I'm not 100% sure where Saskatchewan is at with it, but it is coming and it will happen. for you and your day-to-day operations as a municipality. It shouldn't affect you too much because you will still be using SAS tenders, posting opportunities on there. It's just going to have that pull up to Canada Buys and then have that wider audience looking at that that RFP and template. There is some new defined awarding structure on it though, that the federal government should be communicating with SAS tenders, and then they should be rolling that out to you folks too if they haven't already. I don't know, Amanda, if you have any other knowledge or anything on
no,
that.
I don't have much else to add. I do know that this is on the horizon, but I know SAS tenders, from what I understand, will still remain how it is. Like they'll still post on SAS tenders, but it'll just get filtered through the Canada Buys. So
Gotcha. That's really helpful. I wasn't sure if one was going to be canceling the other or if they're going to work together. Sounds like they're going to work together. So
At least in
Yeah.
the initial stages, you never
yeah,
know.
yeah. Well,
that's the I think the plan so far. So I guess
Okay.
we'll see if anything changes.
great. One last thing, and then we'll close this part of our session down. Amanda, I think you had to do some reporting on behalf of SARM with regard to purchases that went through the buying group. Are rural municipalities now being asked also to report on their procurements?
So the reporting that I had done recently was sort of over the threshold. So
Uh-huh.
I reported for all the RMs who have purchased over that 75 threshold, and it all gets calculated together in, like, depending on goes by supplier, and that's how it's calculated. And then I sent over that report to the government. And from what I understand, the RMs are not required to submit anything.
Okay.
This is sort of done on their behalf.
Gotcha. Great. Well, thank you both. Again, really appreciate it, Tyler and Amanda, for your time, your expertise. It is great to know that we've got you in our corners to be able to ask our questions or to seek some advice. Again, I think Ainsley was on the call, and I hope that she gets some phone calls out of this as well. We can, folks can contact her even through the SARM website. We've got both Amanda's contact information there and Ainsley's as well. So thank you so much, Tyler and Amanda.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you.
Great. So we're going to transition now from the world of public sector procurement to the world of human rights. And so our next session is rural municipalities and the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, everything you wanted to know but were afraid to ask. And so our presenter for that session is Robin Mowat. Robin's just getting set up. I see him on the screen now, so that's great. Robin is the Director of Systemic Initiatives at the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission. He's a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan. Previously, he served with the Canadian Forces Army Reserve for 21 years, retiring as a warrant officer in 2015, and worked in communications in the public and private sectors before joining the Commission in 2012. And so we're really glad to have Robin on the call with us today. This session, or this part of the overall workshop, emerged just as SARM and as Sask Human Rights were coming to the awareness that, yeah, we got this opportunity for training here. And one of the places that we can do that is with our newly elected or our elected officials and their councils. There are some things that every elected official needs to know, and Robin's going to be able to share that with you today. So I'll pass it off to you, Robin. Welcome here, and thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Dustin. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak with everyone today about human rights legislation in Saskatchewan and the types of responsibilities that legislation imposes on rural municipalities, primarily as employers and as service providers. I have to accept control or something. There it is. Sorry. I think I got it now. All right. So to begin with, I want to talk to you a little bit about Frank. So Frank was 61 years old, and he had worked for the local rural municipality in a seasonal maintenance role for more than 20 years. Then a full-time foreman position opened up with the RM. Frank applied, but Frank did not get the job. When he inquired as to the reasons why he wasn't hired, he was told by one RM counselor that it was because he was getting too old for that kind of work. So under the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code, it's prohibited to discriminate against a person on the basis of age. Frank filed a human rights complaint alleging discrimination in employment on the basis of age. And the RM also later terminated him from his seasonal position. So this complaint was accepted, and during the investigation phase, the RM counselor in question agreed that he in fact did tell Frank that age was a factor in the decision not to hire him. However, the counselor was clear, and there was other evidence as well, that Frank's age was not actually the reason why they didn't hire him. The successful job applicant was simply more skilled in a number of areas than Frank. But the counselor thought that it might hurt Frank's feelings to tell him the truth, that the other candidate was more skilled. And so rather than telling him the truth, the counselor, who was himself over 65 years old, tried commiserating with him in a friendly, jocular manner about how old they were. So the case was subsequently settled in mediation. There was a payment to Frank in this case, but it was primarily as a result of the liability that the RM had as a result of the termination of Frank, and not a result of not hiring him for the foreman position. So in this case, a small mistake in an otherwise straightforward hiring process led to a human rights complaint and required the RM's time and money to divert to that complaint process. Most of the time, unintentional comments about age don't lead to human rights complaints. However, administrators and counselors need to be aware of the obligations under the Human Rights Code in order to potentially avoid future unnecessary complaints. So that was Frank's story, and throughout the presentation, I'll provide some more stories about that have happened in rural municipalities across Saskatchewan. But like other presenters as well, I'll be providing you with useful information about the legislation and obligations of rural municipalities, but I won't be providing you with legal advice. So here's an outline for today's session. We might end earlier than the time required, so that's nice. I know that everyone's been sitting here for a few hours now. We'll start with just an explanation of what human rights even are, and what the concept is, and then we'll delve into the legislation itself. And I'll give you an overview and the key parts of the legislation that you need to have a familiarity with. And we'll talk about the concept of discrimination and the duty to accommodate, which are really the most important parts of human rights systems. I'll go over our human rights complaint process that's here in Saskatchewan. It's unique in Canada. And then we'll have time for any questions that you have and discussion. Excuse me. So I do have another short story here about another employee at a rural municipality. He'd been an employee for about 6 years. And one day when he was off work, so this was not work related, he suffered a head injury, a significant head injury and concussion. So he provided the RM with a doctor's note that said he would be absent from work. And he was absent for work for a number of months. At the end of that period, he did attempt to return to work. In this particular case, Stan felt that he had been subject to some harassment from counsel in this case, which he felt exacerbated his concussion symptoms. So he went back on medical leave. During his absence, he did periodically provide medical notes justifying his absence from work. But after about 18 months, the RM put out a job advertisement in order to replace Stan. Now, Stan provided medical information that would allow him to return to work on a part-time basis, for at least in a gradual return to work. But the RM in this case refused to accommodate that request for a gradual return to work. And they insisted that he must be able to work 100% before they would allow him to return. So in this case, Stan filed a complaint, and ultimately the chief commissioner referred it to the Court of King's Bench for a hearing. And in the court, the judge found that the RM had discriminated against Stan because of his disability, and that the RM also failed to establish that accommodating the part-time return to work would have constituted undue hardship for the RM. And we're going to talk about undue hardship in a little bit. In this case, there were significant costs to the RM. The court awarded Stan approximately $110,000 for lost wages and other benefits, and an additional $10,000 for the discrimination. So we've heard two stories about human rights complaints. So I'm going to just step back now and just give you a little bit of background on what human rights even are. So as it says here on the slide, human rights are moral principles or norms for certain human behavior that are protected specifically in law. So in Canada, we have a lot of experience with human rights laws going all the way back to the 1940s in Ontario and here in Saskatchewan with the 1947 Bill of Rights. So this period, since in the aftermath of the Second World War, there's been lots of attention to human rights, and that's really where human rights came to be a legal concept. And in part, it's a response to the conflicts and atrocities during the Second World War. And a key part of human rights is the concept that everybody shares the same claim to dignity, and that we have to treat each other with the same concept of dignity and respect, and according to their own circumstances. So we'll talk about that here as we go forward. The most recent iteration of human rights legislation in Saskatchewan was passed in the Legislative Assembly in 2018. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislation now. So the legislation itself sets out some key objectives that the legislation is intended to obtain. So, and that is the promotion of this concept of the inherent dignity and equal rights of all members of the human family. So again, this means treating people with fairness and respect, which is really the key timeless principle at the heart of human rights law. This legislation, again, is provincial legislation, right? So it only applies in areas of provincial responsibility. So there are aspects, there are activities in Saskatchewan that fall under federal jurisdiction, such as interprovincial trucking, airplanes, banking. Those kinds of activities would fall under federal legislation. But here in Saskatchewan, for provincially regulated matters, we have the Human Rights Code, and it takes precedence over all other legislation in the province unless that legislation has explicitly stated that it's exempt from the code. So it has a quasi-constitutional status, and it has provisions for that mirror the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, like freedom of assembly, and freedom of expression. But primarily, what the Human Rights Code is known for is its anti-discrimination provisions, which we'll talk about. One of the things that the Human Rights Code does is establish the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission as an entity charged with enforcing the act. So the commission has about, at any time, about 25 to 30 employees. And our services are provided to everyone free of charge. And here's just a sampling of the number of cases that we handle on a yearly basis. And here you can see how important employment is to the work that we do here at the commission. The vast majority of complaints that we get are employment related, primarily because when people lose their job, they lose their livelihood, and that's has a huge impact on their life, and they're motivated to complain to somebody about it, either us, the Human Rights Commission, labor standards, or other bodies when there's a conflict over the nature of their termination. So the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code, generally speaking, prohibits discrimination on the basis of what are called prohibited grounds. So these are these personal characteristics that each of us have, that it's unlawful to discriminate against someone because of. So it's unlawful to discriminate against someone because of their race or religion. I think all these categories are relatively self-explanatory. The ones I'll just point out here that are a little bit more nuanced is first the concept of family status, which is the status of being in a parent-child relationship. So most often this would be maybe your employees who have some additional responsibilities to their children because their children are sick, and they need to maybe take some time off to care for them. So it's about that parent-child relationship. The other one here would be receipt of public assistance. And so this would be people who are receiving monies from the provincial government under the SIS program or the SED program. So it's social assistance. And again, just because they're receiving that money, it's unlawful to discriminate against them on that basis. Again, if you have any questions about any of these definitions, the legislation itself does have some definitions for these characteristics, but if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. So the legislation prohibits discrimination on those protected characteristics in these areas of society here. So again, the big ones here, especially for rural municipalities, are going to be employment and the obligations that you have to your employees and potential employees, and public services, and that's the obligations that you have to the public that you serve. There are other important ones here. Education is a big one. You may also encounter, we were just talking about procurement, contracts as well. It's prohibited to discriminate against people in contracts. So there could be other applications, but for the most part, it's Section 16 and Section 12, employment and public services. So Lucy was the first female firefighter hired in her rural municipality. And from the beginning of her time at the fire department, she experienced some differential treatment. So she was subjected to harassment and gender discrimination by her coworkers and also management. So, and this included hazing rituals, which some of them were of a sexual nature, derogatory and sexually explicit comments towards her, and gossip about her sexual history. Lucy also alleged that because she was a woman, her co-workers did not believe that she could perform the same physical tasks required of her. And so she was regularly singled out for duties such as cleaning, because, again, she felt because of her gender. So she reported this behavior to her employer in the proper internal mechanisms. The employer did investigate the discrimination and confirmed that it did exist and that sexual harassment had occurred. However, the employer did not take any steps to remedy the situation and to make it better. So Lucy ultimately ended up on medical leave and filed a complaint with the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, alleging discrimination on the basis of sex and gender. So ultimately, this complaint was accepted and went to investigation. It was investigated. There was a settlement at that point between the employer and Lucy. She received $13,000 for damages to dignity and due to the discrimination, and the case was closed. So we've been talking so far about this thing called discrimination, which I think we probably all have an intuitive sense, but I'm going to go over exactly what that means in the context of human rights. And then the concept of accommodation, which is in many ways the opposite of discrimination. Discrimination is treating someone unfairly, promoting inequality or inequity because of the differences that that person has. Accommodation is sort of the flip side. It's recognizing those differences that people have and providing them opportunities to be successful in a way that respects their dignity. I'll give you some examples here. First, discrimination for the purposes of human rights complaints has this sort of three-step process here. So it has to be some kind of unfair treatment. It could be a job termination, discipline, a refusal to hire somebody. It could be the unfair allocation of tasks, which we saw in Lucy's case. But it has to be something that is, that you can define and explain as being unfair. The second one is that there has to be a connection to that unfairness with one of those protected characteristics. So there has to be, this could be comments that are made. So in Lucy's case, there were comments made towards her, that were sexual in nature. So very explicitly connected to her sex, a protected characteristic. And then the third criteria here is that it has to happen in one of those protected areas of life. So employment or public services. Lucy's case, it was employment. So with those three factors, you are required to make an allegation of discrimination under the code, and all three of these things would need to be present before we would be able to accept a complaint. If all three of them are not there, then we reject the complaint. So we've already given some examples of kinds of discrimination that happen in the workplace. Here's a couple other ones that we haven't talked about. Inaccessible work areas. So this could be making sure that you have doorways that could accommodate employees that are using a wheelchair or something like that, or ramp. So in the absence of those, where there's an employee who needs them, that could constitute discrimination. It could also just be policies that exist that don't treat employees fairly, or don't provide for the possibility of an accommodation. And again, workplace culture, a good example of that was in Lucy's case. And so this is a really common image that we see nowadays, but it is helpful to sort of explain a little bit of the difference between treating your employees equally or equitably. And equitable treatment's usually the kind of basis that you think about when you're trying to accommodate. So if you have a rule that all employees have to work shifts that would require them to work on Sundays from time to time, if you have an employee who has a sincere religious belief that requires them to attend church services on Sunday mornings, you may have to find some way to accommodate for that. It could be providing them with time off so that they can attend the service when they make up that time somewhere else. What the specific solution is always going to be unique to the situation. But just but often it's making those exceptions, making the changes and finding a way to make it work rather than insisting that everybody do exactly the same thing. And this could also apply for injuries. If you have an employee who's injured and unable to do a certain kind of work, then you might have to change their work in some way to allow them to continue to do work, but in a safe manner. So it's similar to that, but that accommodation process applies not only to disability, but those other protected grounds as well. Again, we've been talking about this, and here's an example of an urban municipality that has provided accommodation in its transit services through accessible busing. And so you may have some services in your municipality that require maybe some changes to make them more accessible. Could be a community rink or something like that. If you have residents that have needs that would require changes, like a ramp or something like that. We could talk about those if you have any specific questions down the road. So again, the duty to accommodate is this concept that employers have, that service providers have, where they're required to provide some change in the way that they provide the service or expect their employees to work in order to allow the service to be accessed or to allow the employee to be successful. So the key part here is it doesn't require an employer or service provider to provide a perfect solution to the issue. It just has to be a reasonable solution. And so an employee may require, or back to that example of an employee who has a sincere religious belief and needs to take some time off on Sunday. He might have initially requested the whole Sunday off, but in a conversation with him, you might determine that he doesn't actually require the whole Sunday off. He only requires, several hours to attend the church service in his particular case. Somebody else's religious belief might be different, but in his case, he is able to do work after he attends the church service. So rather than give him the whole day off, you might be able to give him several hours off, and then he could still return to work. So doesn't have to be the perfect solution. It just has to be something that is reasonable. But the key to making an accommodation work is good communication between the employee and the employer, or the public and the service provider, and often requires a little bit of a back and forth. Typically with employees who have a medical condition, you would expect to engage with them over a period of time, receiving updated medical information as the time goes forward. And as the medical information changes, the type of accommodation would expect to change. And in many cases, ultimately, no accommodation would ultimately be needed. An employee can return fully to work. And I just explained this. The key thing here is maybe the third part I haven't emphasized is that, yes, in some cases, while an employee might prefer a different arrangement, if what the employer is providing is reasonable, they may have to accept that. And in some cases, what the employee might want as an accommodation is not feasible because it's too expensive, or it's maybe it would have some safety risks involved. So those limits to accommodation are what we would call undue hardship. So this is the key concept that would limit an employer's and service provider's obligation to provide the accommodation. The key one here, and the most normal one, perhaps, would be an intolerable financial cost. So I talked about making facilities accessible. Sometimes if you're talking about retrofits for old buildings, just the nature of the building, the nature of the physical location of the building, it might be extremely expensive to provide a top tier retrofit that would be accessible. And so for some places, it might push many of those retrofits out of, out of the realm of possibility because of the costs. And this would be potentially undue hardship. And it would be a defense then for a rural municipality about why they did not provide that accommodation. Safety risks is the other big one. This might be where you have an employee who has, say an addictions issue, or some other serious medical condition that would impair his ability to operate heavy equipment, for instance. And so you have a duty to accommodate the employee for that disability, but simply allowing him to continue to operate that vehicle would constitute a safety risk because of the impairment that the disability or the treatment for the disability causes. And so you might not be able to do that, and you might be able to accommodate him in some other way. We see this often. People go on light duties, so they might do some paperwork or something like that. Ultimately, if there is no other available work, then the accommodation might simply be to have the employee be on medical leave for a period of time until they're able to return. But simply, the process of accommodation doesn't require employers to incur additional risks for like safety or again, intolerable financial costs. So it's quite often, and probably for counselors and administrators present, you may have already been involved in this process many times, where you have an employee who is too sick to work. You would already have gone through the process of asking them for some medical information. So here's just an outline of some stuff that's typical that you could reasonably require that the employee provide in order to provide the accommodation, which again includes being absent from work on medical leave. So you're not entitled to know the diagnosis of something that would be wrong with an employee. So if they have cancer or a specific type of cancer, you wouldn't expect to know that. What you are looking for, and the key to making accommodation work, is to know what the specific restrictions or limitations of the employee are, right, from a medical point of view. So are they, it could be that they are unable to lift more than 10 pounds over their heads. It could be that they're unable to sit for a prolonged period of time. So the role here of the doctor in this case is to provide those specific restrictions. The employee brings those to the employer, and then the employer is able to fashion specific accommodation based on those limitations. So it's not up to the doctor to tell the employer what accommodation is needed. It's up to the doctor to tell the employer what specific restrictions the employee has, and then it's up to the employer to come up with an accommodation. Often there's sort of a ongoing dialogue with the employee and their doctor about, is this accommodation appropriate or not? But really, it's up to the employer just to determine that accommodation. And so it could be changing job tasks, and maybe this is just a short-term thing. If they're unable to lift heavy stuff, that's fine. Don't lift that stuff. Do this other job instead, and we'll have somebody else do that in the meantime. It could be providing additional safety equipment or technical equipment that might allow them to lift. So, using a forklift or something instead of doing the heavy lifting by hand. That's maybe not the best example, but other kinds of equipment that could help allow them to be successful in their job. Again, this is an ongoing process. Employees and employers should expect this to change over time. And again, ultimately, you'd want the employee to return full-time work if that's possible. Here's just some key tips. One of the things that employers will want to do if they're not already doing them is they want to make sure that they're documenting the steps that they take very thoroughly, keeping track of all the emails that they get from an employee. Nowadays, it's not uncommon for employees to be texting information to their employer. So you want to make sure that you keep track of those texts, screenshots or some other process where you're saving it. And really the key here is that, one, you're going to have a clear record of what happened for your own purposes to look back and make sure that you understand what's going on, but also to potentially as key information to defend yourself against any human rights complaints that might result from the situation. You have a clear timeline, you have a clear track record of what the employee was told when, what they were asked to do or told to do. And so if there's a future dispute or conflict over it, you'll have an important record for yourself. Asking for medical information early on is often a good idea. It's not required in every case, and you kind of have to use some judgment, right? If the employee has a pretty straightforward situation, it's obvious what the situation is. Maybe it's visible, they have broken their leg. You may not need to document that so thoroughly, but I have seen many cases where an employer will allow an employee to access medical leave or other kinds of accommodations for long periods of time without documenting any of that. And then ultimately found themselves in a situation where, they had to take some action against the employee, or just the situation was no longer acceptable, and they still didn't have any medical information from which to help them make decisions. So again, often a good idea and in the interest of the employer and the employee to collect some of that medical information as soon as is possible. One of the key things I haven't talked about here that an employer can do, and one of the things that I hope that you take away from this presentation today, is that you can always call us. So we do run a business hotline, we call it, and you can call us or you can email us, and that will go to our hotline person. We get hundreds of calls from employers every year. They present us with a specific situation that they're dealing with, and we can provide them with some information about how human rights applies in that situation and some of the step-by-step process that they might want to follow through to make sure that they are both upholding their obligations towards their employees, but also in a way that would potentially help protect the employer if there was ever a dispute later. So hopefully, at the end of the presentation today, you will have, have a sense of the kinds of issues, the kinds of characteristics that are protected, and that if you're ever dealing with one of those situations, and most often it's medical and disability related, that you can reach out to the Human Rights Commission and get our information to help you make decisions and avoid potential complaints. Like this one, maybe. So Mike had been an employee at rural municipality for 7 years. A month before his 65th birthday, Mike was asked to meet to discuss his retirement plans. So again, as we've seen before, retirement and for the most part, mandatory retirement is contrary to the Human Rights Code. So during this meeting, he was asked if he was willing to train his replacement in the event of his retirement. Mike told the employer that he had no plans of retiring because he wanted to work for a few more years. But he said he would ultimately be willing to train his replacement when that time came. The following day, however, a resolution was passed in a special council meeting to hire a firm to recruit for Mike's position. And the position was posted on the internet. When Mike found out, he spoke to the administrative officer and reiterated that he had no intentions of retiring soon. The following day, he clarified that again in writing to council and the administrator, but a few weeks later, he was terminated. So he believed that he had been subject to discrimination on the basis of age and filed a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. So this matter was then resolved relatively quickly through mediation. And in this case, the employer agreed to pay Mike $75,000 retirement allowance and an additional $20,000 for the discriminatory element. So Mike accepted that offer and the file was closed. So I've talked about a few stories about how the process of complaints work. And so I just want to give you a little bit more detail on that so you understand the process. The first thing is that human rights complaints do happen. There's hundreds of complaints a year. They're not necessarily the end of the world. Often there's miscommunication or sincere disagreements about what actually happened. And so the process here is to resolve those disputes. It's relatively straightforward to make a complaint, and they can be made online by going to our website. When we get a complaint, we assess it to see, again, for those three things. Was there unfair treatment? Was it connected to one of the protected grounds? And is it in an area that's protected by the code, like employment? And if those three things exist as allegations, then we have to take the complaint. And that process looks a little bit like this. So that complaint comes in at the intake stage, and very quickly it goes to, if we accept the complaint, and many complaints are refused because we can't accept them. So, but the first step is to try to mediate the process. The parties come together with our mediators, and the approach here is really restorative. It's not punitive. The idea here is that the parties get together with somebody that helps them resolve their dispute, and most cases are resolved in that stage. Most of the ones I've talked about today as examples have gone beyond that stage to the investigation stage, or even all the way to the Court of King's Bench. But at each one of these stages, the intent is to try to resolve it in a way that's agreeable to all the parties with the facts that they have at the time. So it can be resolved following a formal investigation. Once there's an investigation and the decision is made by the chief commissioner to send it to court, again, there's still yet more opportunities to try to resolve it through mediation. And Court of King's Bench itself has a mediation, a pretrial mediation. So we really do emphasize mediation as the approach. And generally, the human rights system in Saskatchewan is remedial and not specifically punitive. Although, as we've seen in some of these stories, there are settlements that involve financial compensation. And again, I talked at the very beginning that Saskatchewan has a unique human rights process in the country, and that's because the decider of human rights complaints in Saskatchewan is a judge at the Court of King's Bench. So we do not have a human rights tribunal like other places have. We have a process that ultimately goes to a regular Court of King's Bench. And this is just a slide reiterating that most of those complaints are resolved prior to going to court. And that has value because it's the parties themselves, for the most part, that are coming up with what the solution is going to be, right? And sometimes that's an exchange of money. Sometimes it's reinstatement to work. Sometimes it's a simple apology. It really depends on what the case is, but both of the parties are agreeing to that solution when there's a settlement. So there's a lot of power there that both parties have, rather than putting their fate in the hands of a judge who will decide, entirely one way or another and may please nobody. So it's a really successful process that the parties themselves get to help decide how it's going to be resolved. When a complaint is dismissed after investigation, it's usually because, yes, there were allegations of discrimination, but the investigation found that those allegations were not substantiated by evidence, and so the complaint would be dismissed. And that happens a fair amount as well. And I have one example here of a job interview that you guys would do lots of hiring, so I just wanted to point this out. In this particular case, George was asked questions during his hiring interview about like where he was from. He was originally from outside of the country, and he really internalized that, and ultimately he was offered the job, but he didn't feel comfortable accepting it because he wasn't sure about how those questions about his place of origin or his race would play out during his employment. So this was a situation that was resolved through mediation. And in this case, the employer had accepted that the line of questioning during the interview wasn't appropriate and agreed to pay George a small amount. And then I have one more scenario, or one more case to talk about, and then I will answer some questions. So this case is this situation is more of a public service case. So this involved a member of the public, and this is a complicated one with no easy answers. So Aaron is a person with a mental health disability, and he lived in a small town in Saskatchewan. So this is an urban municipality, but a small town that it could also be similar to an experience that rural municipalities have experienced. So this was back during the COVID situation, and he went to the town office and inquired about making donations to people, and the town had nothing to do with what he was asking to do. And so he left. They asked him to leave, and just his approach to the situation left them feeling kind of unsettled. So he left. About a month later, he came back to the town office to talk about his water bill. And according to witnesses, he was not wearing a mask as was required during COVID protocols at that time. He refused to put it on, and the town felt he was being disruptive. So police were called, but he left on his own accord. And based on those two incidents, the town decided to ban him from all town facilities, and that he would be charged with trespassing, or could be charged with trespassing, if he returned. So the problem here is that Aaron's behavior was really aligned with his mental health disability. It wasn't necessarily deliberately offensive or antagonistic. And in this case, Aaron's mother was still involved in his care and spoke to the town council, trying to resolve the issue. The town did start to engage, but sort of took a really more aggressive line of questioning in this case that was maybe warranted by the situation. And so the ban continued, and ultimately Aaron left the town and moved to a different place. So in this case, Aaron and his mother filed a human rights complaint, alleging discrimination in public services on the basis of disability. And this was a case that was mediated and resolved. And in this case, the resolution included that the town would provide some additional training to its staff on an ongoing basis to help inform them more about dealing with members of the public with mental illnesses. And so that's how that case with Aaron was resolved. So questions, discussions, we could talk about the duty to accommodate and discrimination, any of the protected grounds. I've talked primarily about employment and public services, but you may have questions about other things as well. I'm happy to answer those. I think there was a question about our contact information in the chat. Here it is again. And our website does have lots of useful information on a range of different topics. So if you have maybe you're dealing with a member of the public with a service animal, we have a lot of information on our website about service animals, and so you can go find some information about that, and that might help. Otherwise, as well, just call us and we'll have a conversation with you, and you can tell us about the details and how we can give you some information about how best to proceed.
Yeah, thanks so much, Robin.
All
This
right.
has been really great. Lots of I really appreciate all the scenarios. It's really when you start looking and picking apart the scenarios, you get a sense of how these principles and ideas come to apply and how they kind of work together. Don't see any questions in the chat just yet. I'm curious personally about what are some questions that we should be asking ourselves as we wonder if we're starting to bump up against a human rights issue? What are some things that we should be sort of discussing and keeping at the forefront?
Yeah. Anytime, I mean, you're going to, for the most part, you're going to be going about doing your business that you do every day, and you're not going to be thinking about human rights a lot, very often. But I would, you're going to run into a situation, maybe most often it's going to be an employee who has a medical situation. That would be the most common one. And in those cases, you would just have to kind of remember, yeah, there's all kinds of other things I need to think about. OH&S, I need to think about collective agreements, the specifics of medical leave. But keep in mind as well that there is also human rights legislation about the duty to accommodate and the potential that, there could be a human rights complaint on down the road. And so if you remember that, you'll remember either to contact us to ask for some more information, because you don't necessarily need to know it all at the time. So that would be the key takeaway. Contact us. Or then you're just aware, and you'll want to make sure to go back to some of those steps of documenting things, and just being cautious of that. So otherwise, just generally speaking, you're going to want to conduct business in a way that seems fair, right? And if you're treating people fairly with respect, 99.9% of the time, you're going to avoid problems with the Human Rights Code. And even if you run into problems, maybe they're not human rights problems, but if sometimes human rights issues are sort of they arise out of other conflicts. So you're dealing with some sort of personality conflict. Maybe it involves disability, or it's just a personality conflict. Maybe somebody down the road might allege harassment. So you just if you again, you're trying to resolve a dispute, and I think we heard about this a little bit before as well. If you're dealing with disagreements and disputes, if you can treat people with respect and in a fair way, even through those disputes, you're going to avoid, again, many potential human rights complaints.
That's really helpful. I'm curious, do public sector organizations like municipalities have a unique standing in the human rights code, or is there a higher bar that they have to meet over a private business? What's your experience in that front?
They're pretty, private businesses and government entities are treated basically the same under the legislation. The difference often is that is the nature of the work that you do. It's a different kind of thing. You're not selling things per se, right? You're providing services. So the nature of the work is different. You tend to have a different kind of, generally speaking, you may have more like unionized employees. than a private business. And so that might change things a little bit because you have a union structure there that might, you know, the union is there to help employees, and so they can help employees file a human rights complaint, right? So we might see more often, or, you know, sort of per capita, a higher rate of complaints involving a public entity that is unionized as opposed to a private entity. And then as well, because like some rural municipalities and some urban municipalities would have a fair amount of money, revenue every year from the tax base. And so the key thing there is that's going to differentiate them from a smaller business that has a smaller revenue stream. The duty to accommodate might manifest itself a little bit different because the undue hardship levels are going to be different. If you're running a small mom and pop shop, what constitutes intolerable financial impact is going to be much lower than if you run, you know, a large organization with millions of dollars in revenue. So the expectations in that sense might be a little bit different for a rural municipality. It might depend on which rural municipality it is, but that would be probably the key difference. But as far as the law goes, they treat businesses and governments essentially the same.
Oh, that's really helpful. And I was going to ask about the thresholds for undue hardship. You kind of clarified that for me already, that it's sort of tied to the size and the I guess overall revenues of a given business, and so they're a little bit relative, I suppose, what a small business could do versus what a large organization may be asked to do.
That's right.
So that's helpful.
And the nature of the operation might be different as well. So the impact on quote unquote business for an RM might be different when they accommodate an employee than if it's a mom and pop shop, they're accommodating an employee, that employee is critical to them earning revenue. So maybe it's not so much the financial cost, because the cost isn't there, but the impact on the business would be so
Gotcha.
disruptive that they have to take it, that constitutes undue hardship too.
Makes sense. One last question for me then. Thinking about, like you mentioned a lot about employees, what about ratepayers? Could a ratepayer make a claim against an RM or a municipality for a human rights complaint? I'm not quite sure what. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the accusation that there was the RM was grading one person's road more than another or more properly or something along those lines. Is that a human rights matter as well, or could be?
I mean, we don't see a lot of them, but we
Yeah.
have seen some of them. Yeah. And
Okay.
so again, sometimes this relates to previous personal disputes. We've seen situations like that. We have seen more, maybe more legitimate grounds where, you know, a municipality has a responsibility to provide services to everybody, and potentially those services might need to anticipate accommodation. So I'm not exactly sure how it would play out in a rural municipality per se, but if you can imagine an urban municipality, they have certain responsibilities to make sure that you know, the sidewalks in front of public facilities are clear. That a ratepayer can access this could apply in rural municipality. Ratepayer can access the waste disposal, like the trash system,
Sure.
in a way. So maybe this ratepayer has a disability, they're mobility impaired. How are they going to access that at the dump, or if the garbage is picked up, how do they get it out? So those are service related questions. You can think about those in how it might apply in your RM. How could this service be adjusted in a way that makes it more accessible for everyone in the all the ratepayers?
Sure. Well, this is really helpful. We didn't end up getting any questions in. Of course, there's your contact information there for folks to reach out afterwards. And maybe some of the questions are the sort that you don't want to ask in a public forum, but want to
quite
maybe
often.
seek some advice on. So I think that's understandable. Robin, I want to thank you for your time today and thank you for your expertise. And as I'm saying goodbye, I'm already seeing a question come in. So I'm going to just grab that one while it's here. It says, on average, once a complaint has reached the commissioner, how long does it take to finalize?
Yeah, you know, for the most part, most complaints are resolved in that intake mediation phase, right? And that phase, I would say, is 3-4 months. So you can think about that. And there's always going to be situations on either end of that where we can resolve things extremely quickly. We can resolve things, in fact, informally before there's a formal complaint. So we have resolved potential complaints within an hour. But that would be an extreme example. And then on the other case, you get complicated cases that might require a lot of investigation, lengthy research, and that could take, you know, it could take, in those rare cases, it could take up to 2 years. But the vast majority there, 80%, are going to be resolved in that, you know, 3-4 month window. Again, it depends on the specifics of that case.
Gotcha.
It's a good
I'm just
question.
going to check our Q&A here. There might be a few more. I might have been looking at the wrong this tab, which would be awesome. And then I'm missing people's questions, which wouldn't be good. Here's a good question. Sometimes you can't tell there is a disability. The person or public does not say or inform. What is the line then for disruptive versus accommodate, especially when they are aggressive?
Yeah, and that sounds like it's a lot related to that last scenario that I talked about with Aaron. So, because as service providers, you're going to, from time to time, the reality is you're going to engage with people that are disruptive and aggressive, and for the safety of the employees, you do have to take some steps to mitigate that, right? And so I think it's in, you know, it's, you know, you could ask people. I mean, it would depend on the circumstances what the most appropriate approach would be. You might have information about a person because they come back multiple times. You might learn that they do in fact have a disability. You may suspect that they do from the manner of which they speak or act, that they could have a disability. That's not going to excuse, you know, aggressive, insulting behavior, but right, you're still going to want to try to, you know, eliminate or reduce that behavior. But you can at least try other approaches. So you might, rather than banning somebody, you might insist that they make an appointment. You might ask them to call instead of showing up in person. So there'd be some sort of practical steps you might be able to take if you suspected that there was a disability. At the end of the day, the key part in the Aaron story was the mother's intervention, informing the town that her son had this disability and encouraging the town to accommodate him in some way. And the town, you know, started to kind of do that. Just in that particular case, the process wasn't maybe as effective or rapid. So, yeah, it really depends on the circumstances. The expectation is not that, you know, frontline employees take abuse. That's not the expectation. But to be open to the possibility that this person's behavior is attributable to a disability, if you have reason to suspect that, right? And probably most of the time it's the behavior is attributable to something other than disability. So yeah, don't take away with it you know, the sense that you would have to endure inappropriate behavior, but just be open to the possibility that it might be due to some disability that you could at least think about trying to find a way to accommodate it through, you know, setting up appointments or maybe getting a third party involved, like a parent in this case, or or telephone call or something that might allow you to provide the service to the public, but in a way that lessened the impact on the employees.
Great. And one last question I hadn't seen earlier. It's broken into two parts here, but I think it's one question, and that is, so how does this apply for a counselor's interaction with an employee? And I think it's like, for example, if a counselor makes demeaning comments about an employee's work performance.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, a counselor is potentially going to be the employees, in a case where a counselor is misbehaving and maybe subjecting an employee to harassment under the code, the employee is going to have a claim against the RM and that counselor. And what happens is going to depend on the circumstances. But yeah, I would encourage all counselors to be, to again treat people fairly and with respect, even if you're criticizing their work performance, which is I don't know, different RMs might have different processes. Like maybe all that criticism should get funneled through an administrator or something like that rather than coming straight from a counselor. But whatever the case is, just make sure it's done in a respectful and professional manner.
Understood. Okay, well, Robin, thanks again for your time and for bringing your expertise to this Municipal Leaders Roles and Responsibilities session. It's been really helpful, and I think kind of opens up the vast horizon that we have to be thinking about when we consider how to treat people with respect and how to ensure that we're acting in a way that is supporting the dignity of others. So really appreciate that very much.
All right. No, I appreciate it. Thank you, Dustin.
Yeah, absolutely. And your information is there. Someone had asked about a copy of the presentation, which of course all these will be distributed, the PDF version of the PowerPoint. So folks will get that in the coming days. And with that, that's our last presentation. And so we can wrap up our Municipal Leaders Roles and Responsibilities session today. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, for taking part in the discussion through the Q&A. And for paying attention and learning. So if you've got questions, please do forward them to our presenters or forward them to Adam or myself. We'll be happy to direct them to the presenters as well. And we look forward to connecting again, either through other modules for the Municipal Leadership Development Program or through other educational opportunities. So thank you, and I wish everyone a really good evening. Have a good night.